Islands. I don't know if that's true. Maybe.
You can watch the remainder of this hearing online at cspan.org. Just type Coast Guard in the search box. We'll take you live now to the Republican National Lawyers Association annual policy conference. The theme this year is the Trump administration's efforts to loosen regulations. They're just getting started this morning. Live coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
I'd like to thank the Advisory Council and Life members for their support and encourage everyone in the room here to upgrade their membership. And I'd like to thank individually for our generous sponsors, Manny Iglesias, Cooper and Kirk, Greenberg Trarg, Americans for Prosperity, Barnes and Thornburg, Holtzman, Vogel, Josefiak, and Torchinsky, Hush Blackwell, Schutz and Bowen, Wiley Rhine, Adams and Reese, 2652 Group, Beverly Weiss Manny, Boyd and Grant Associates, Clark Hill, the Dillon Law Group, Frost Brown Todd, King and Spalding, Kirsten and Young, the law offices of Terry Campo, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, Michael Kahn, Scott Mexick, the Nixon Law Group. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our chairwoman, Joanne Young.
Good morning. Thank you, David. I am Joanne Young, co-chair of the RNLA, and I also thank you very much for getting up this morning and coming to this unique and very exciting policy conference. 92 of President Trump's outstanding judicial nominees have been confirmed, including 2 Supreme Court justices and 37 Court of Appeals judges. Later this afternoon, we will hear about the Kavanaugh confirmation from this year's Betty Southard Murphy Award winner, Mike Davis, former Chief Counsel for Nominations of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He is an unsung hero who defended the rule of law during the Kavanaugh confirmation and many other confirmation proceedings. So I do want to encourage you to stick around because we have nonstop fantastic speakers. I also serve on the board of the Lawyers Democracy Fund. That's a nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting election integrity. There is more information on LDF, as we call it, on the handouts on your tables, including an op-ed I recently published covering the many problems with California's automatic, or we call it mandatory, voter registration program. House Democrats tried to make automatic voter registration a federal requirement in H.R. 1. Their attempt to federalize and micromanage elections from Washington, efforts that will open our elections to rampant fraud. While Leader McConnell will not allow H.R. 1 to pass in this Congress, Democrats will try to pass pieces of this dangerous legislation both in state legislatures and at the federal level for many years to come. LDF published a thorough, indeed the leading, analysis of H.R. 1, which I encourage you to reference as you face these battles in your states. It can be found on our website, ldf.org, including a summary of the 10 most noxious provisions. Now, I want to turn the podium over to Manuel Iglesias. Manuel is from, or we call him Manny, from Miami. He's a leader in law, in global business, and in politics, most especially in the important key state of Florida. And he's a man I admire greatly. Please welcome the chairman of the RNLA, Manny Iglesias.
Good morning, and thank you, Joanne, for speaking it the way I wrote it. I'll be brief. I just want to take a moment to recognize all those serving in the Trump administration, including 2 of our past chair. Former chair Randy Evans won the lottery when he became ambassador to Luxembourg. better than being ambassador to Honduras. And former Chair John Ryder is now serving on the Tennessee Valley Authority Board. Unfortunately, like many of the Trump nominees, their nominations were unreasonably delayed by the Democrats. I would also like to acknowledge the leadership of Leader McConnell, who earlier this week changed the rules limiting debate so that a lot of our non-controversial nominees can get their appointments confirmed. This will help many whose nominations have been pending for a year or more, like RNLA Life member Dennis Kirk and former RNLA Chair Kimberly Reed. I will now turn the podium over to Professor Don Wallace, RNLA's Vice President and the Program Chair for this conference. Thank you and good morning.
Good morning. I'm Professor Wallace, and I add my welcome. I'm the traffic cop, basically. I'm to remind you all about your CLE requirements and sign-ins. You're supposed to wear your badges all day through the reception, and that's pretty much what I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to introduce the man who's going to introduce our speaker, but I don't see him. Oh, there he is. In a way, I would have loved to have introduced Senator Graham, but there we are. Kevin Hall is a partner of Womble Bond Dickinson. I think you're not in Charlotte, you're in Columbia. Right. And Kevin will introduce Senator Graham.
Good morning, folks. I'm Kevin Hall from Columbia, South Carolina. The law firm is Womble Bond Dickinson. It's a privilege to be here and a privilege to introduce a friend to you. We love Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Lindsey's a fighter. He's a winner. I've had the pleasure of knowing him as a friend, as a client, as his campaign treasurer, in a lot of different capacities over the years. Let me tell you a couple of reasons he makes us so proud. We're here to talk about the rule of law. In our partisan political climate, the rule of law and a commitment to higher principles is often set aside for a lot of partisan bickering and cheap shots. Lindsey has always been effective in the partisan conflicts and at the same time respected the rule of law, promoted the rule of law, and recognized a long-term view. I can remember a number of years ago when Senator Graham and others were criticized for this thing called the Gang of 14 that ended up getting us these two guys, Justices Alito and Roberts, on the Supreme Court. Now, at the time, people were upset within the Republican base, but look what a little bit of passage of time has done and demonstrated. Leadership, commitment to the rule of law, commitment to a Senate advice and consent process that is consistent with the Constitution and not just the partisan leanings of the day. So you guys saw the guy we know in South Carolina in the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. You saw a guy that knew what was going on was wrong and stood up and said it in terms that anybody could understand. And I suggest to you we would not have Justice Kavanaugh but for Lindsey Graham and the leadership of some others as well. Lindsey has chaired the Judiciary Committee now for about 90 days. In that period of time, Attorney General William Barr has been confirmed. Remember how smoothly that went? That's leadership. The Senate has confirmed 7 circuit court judges and one to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The Judiciary Committee itself has confirmed 11 circuit judges and 40 district court judges. Again, leadership. Think about the legacy of those appointments over time. And finally, in this concerning environment with questions about DOJ and FBI objectivity and fairness and FISA abuse, who would you rather have get to the truth than Lindsey Graham? It'll be rigorous, it'll be fair, it'll be thorough. This is our Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. He's a fighter, he's a winner, and I want you to know how much we appreciate him in South Carolina and what a privilege it is to introduce him to you. Senator?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. I have been well introduced. You can do my funeral, but no time soon, Kevin. So listen, I really appreciate that introduction. Kevin is one of the greatest lawyers in the state. He's helped me on my campaigns since I began. He was the treasurer, and if you want to give, now's the time. Where's Kevin? Okay. So anyway, thanks for having me. I appreciate you starting on time, you're Republicans. We're actually starting early. I got to go to the Republican Jewish Coalition today. They're everywhere. Republicans are everywhere. And RJC has been terrific. I'm headed out to Las Vegas. But again, thank you for the kind introduction. I thought I'd get right into it. We change senators at home every 50 years where we need to or not. I took Senator Thurman's place, and he was elected in '54. I was born in '55, so look forward to seeing you for many years to come, I hope. But Republican lawyers, Democratic lawyers, Libertarian lawyers, Vegetarian lawyers, whatever kind of lawyer, people don't like us until they need us. So if you can't take a lawyer joke, you shouldn't be a lawyer. If you can't take a joke in general, you sure as hell should not be in my business. So people laugh until they need us. Then when, you know, this whole lawyer thing, bar talk, hang 'em high. I was a military lawyer, judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, until they put a human being in front of you, then all of a sudden this gets hard when you're in a jury, right? You know, you're talking about crime until it's your grandson stopped for DUI, and you want somebody to help you. The bottom line here is the committee. I'm honored to be the chairman. And how do you get to be chairman? You outlive everybody to your right, and you keep getting elected. So it's nothing to do with merit. That's why I like the Senate. I think I picked the right place for me. So my time has come, and I'm going to try to use it wisely, and I appreciate Kevin and all those in South Carolina who've helped me. We are in kind of divided times, as you can tell. I was one of the 16 people that ran against President Trump, and, you know, he beat my brains out, and he loves for me to say that, so I'm on C-SPAN in case he's watching. I acknowledge my defeat. I want to help you, and I push back when I have to, but I want you to be successful. When I first got asked over to the White House, he says, you know, I don't have your phone number. And I said, there's a reason for that. Sort of the highlight of my campaign. He said, I'm sorry about it. I said, no, that's sort of the most noted I got was my phone number. But we found some common ground. I've come to like President, and he likes himself. So we've got a lot in common already. So far, so good. A lot of noise, and it can be ugly at times, but the 30,000-foot view of thing is pretty good if you're a Republican. And I want to talk a bit about Kavanaugh, because I don't want people to think this is just about Trump, because it's not. Now, Brett Kavanaugh, anybody know Brett? Yeah, I mean, okay, I've known him for 20 years, right? What you see is what you get. He worked in the Bush administration. He was Bush's private secretary when he was president. Nothing came across President Bush's desk that he didn't see. He was very closely involved in 9/11 in the White House on that day. And so Brett is about as good as it gets on our side. You know, he is one of the great conservative minds of his generation. Do you agree he would be on any Republican's list if they were president? No outlier. And I told the Democrats, this is a good day. You know, it could have been Judge Judy. It's Brett Kavanaugh. So, so let's celebrate this. And so I've known him for a long time. I can tell you it's about as mainstream as you ever get on our side. And he was the Bush guy. So President Trump had a list of people he identified that he would choose from, which was unusual, and he won. So he's not doing anything exotic here. And on that list are a lot of good names, and I'm sure many of you know those folks. But Brett and Neil Gorsuch were two of the greatest picks any Republican could have made. Now, so I vote for Sotomayor and Kagan, get the crap beat out of me at home, but that's okay. I thought that's the way it should be. I'm trying to do it the way it used to be. Senator Thurman voted for Justice Ginsburg, not because she agreed with her, because he thought she was a qualified person. And how could you say she's not? Senator Hollings, the longest-serving junior senator in the history of the country, in case you're watching. Happy recent birthday, Fritz. He voted for Justice Scalia. You'll never convince me that he agreed with Justice Scalia, but he was highly qualified. So I think one got 96 votes, one got 97. What the hell happened? Just a complete deterioration of the confirmation process. And why is it always our people? Bork, Thomas, bit of Alito, now Kavanaugh. Well, I don't know why it's always our people, but things have changed, and not for the better. So there's one person not mentioned in Kavanaugh yet, and that is Susan Collins. Of all the people who really mattered, I would put her at the top of the list. Senator Collins gave an explanation of her vote that is the epitome of what the founders had in mind when it came to advising consent. It was logical, well-researched. She took the allegations seriously. She thoroughly vetted him personally, looked at every case he authored, acquired a law professor to advise her, spent an enormous amount of time looking through Brett's record, and came to the conclusion that the accusations against him were unfounded and unjust, and that the body of his work demonstrated a keen intellect, a solid, traditional conservative judge. So I want to thank Susan Collins for saving the rule of law. Now, what Susan did is sustainable. If every senator did what she did, you may not vote yes, but you'll at least have a process that's fair to the nominee, consistent with the constitutional understanding of our role in the Senate. It would make the country proud. It was logical, it was thorough, it was reasoned. The process that Brett went through is unsustainable, I hope. Let me tell you why. Who in this room would want to be next if he had failed? Anybody that wanted the job after that, I would probably not vote for because you're crazy. So the bottom line is, if this had worked, they had destroyed this good man, and he had to withdraw, I think that would be very difficult for conservative judges in the future to step and say, hey, let me do this. And what I told my Democratic colleagues is, if you can do it, we can do it. And it probably would unleash forces on the right. And I am glad Brett made it. I am very proud of the fact that President Trump did not pull the plug on Brett Kavanaugh. A lot of people would have been tempted to do that. The accusations were emotional, and the president stood behind his nominee. So it really did matter to me that Brett made it through, because if he had failed, it would have destroyed the Republican Party, because most Republican activists would have believed that we let them down. And I want you to know that what happened to Brett should never happen again to any judicial nominee. I'm well aware of the problems associated with sexual violence, sexual harassment. Only God knows how many women take abuse to their grave. I'm glad women feel better about coming forward, long overdue. But everybody not only should be heard, there should be a process of evaluating the accusation. It's called the rule of law. And it was turned upside down. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had done this to a Democratic nominee? That if it had been a male Democratic nominee, let's say from California, and a woman in South Carolina came to me in confidence saying, I had a bad experience, please don't tell anybody, and somehow it got out. That if I had recommended a conservative lawyer who never told the woman that the Democrats would have come to South Carolina, she didn't have to go to Washington. if during the hearing of the Democratic nominee, a Republican suggested, you're not presumed innocent when you're charged with when you're accused of a crime because you have a different philosophy than we do. It would just be outrage all over the country. The double standard in the media is appalling. And it's appalling in the 2016 campaign. So thank you for helping those who did help Brett, who stood by Brett, much appreciated. He's going to be a great justice, and I'm hoping after this debacle we'll get back to a more mainstream way of challenging a nominee that will adopt the Susan Collins way of evaluating a nominee, not the mob who followed her around and myself and spit on us. That's not exactly what the rule of law is all about. So Mueller. Mueller is has done his job. To all those who wanted Mueller to do his job without political interference, mission accomplished. I stood up during this debate and said, listen, I trust Mueller. I've known him for 20 years. I think it'll be fair to the president, the country as a whole, and I'll make sure I can do everything I can to let him do his job without political interference, and he did. The president has fought back. He fought back hard, but it was an accusation against him. So Barr, anybody know Bill Barr? Bottom line is that's as good as it gets on our side. So the point I want to make to you is not just about Trump, it's about us. Kavanaugh was the Bush guy, and they tried to kill him in terms of him being able to be on the Supreme Court. Barr has served as Attorney General, one of the best reputations in this town. And look what's being said about him. So don't think for a minute this is about Trump. It's about Republican conservatives. That's what this is about. And we're going to fight back. And we're going to put the interests of the country ahead of anything else when we do our fighting. So Barr will be coming to the committee. He'll tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I am very convinced he would not tell the country Mueller's findings unless they were accurate. Why in the world would he say there's no evidence of collusion unless the report said that? Insufficient evidence to prosecute on obstruction of justice unless the report said that. All of a sudden, because it's Trump, every rule in the book has to be violated. 6E no longer matters because it's Trump, right? Classified information doesn't matter because it stands in the way of getting an outcome, which is to destroy Trump. The rule of law has been obliterated because this insane hatred of President Trump. I'm sure we have made our mistakes in the past, but I've never seen anything like this. It's all about an outcome. So when Mueller's report is put to bed, and it will be in May, and the American public will be allowed to see that which is appropriate under the rule of law and national security doctrine, we will move on. And I'm going to lead the charge to move on. Moving on means looking back. So, role reversal. Role reversal. Play this out for a minute. You had the Republican Party hire a foreign agent to gather dirt on Hillary Clinton using Russian sources, producing a document that was used to get a warrant that's complete garbage against a Clinton campaign operative. Do you think they would want to know more? If the two agents investigating Clinton openly talked about how much they hate her guts and hope she gets no votes, and they like Trump, do you think we would have heard about that by now? You can't find this anywhere but on Fox News. It just stuns me how this doesn't matter. Well, it matters to me and it matters to you. It's called the rule of law. So here's the question before the committee and the country. Was a FISA warrant issued against an American citizen, Carter Page, based on a document prepared by a foreign agent paid for by a political party that is unverified to this day? Don't you want to know the answer to that? What if the answer is yes? Was there a counterintelligence investigation opened up against the Trump campaign without real solid evidence? Question: why did not the people in charge of the counterintelligence investigation tell the president and his campaign, you're being targeted by a foreign entity? That's the purpose of a counterintelligence investigation. Senator Feinstein, my dear friend, had a person in her office believed to have been connected with the Chinese government. They did a counterintelligence investigation, informed her of that fact, and she fired the guy. Why did they never tell Trump? Any of you done criminal trials? How, and I'm not interested in retrying Secretary Clinton, I am interested in how the hell this investigation ended and how it got started and how it was handled. I promise you, very few people get interviewed by the FBI without being under oath and having 2 staff members there. Everything normal didn't exist, and why? So Mr. Horowitz is going to tell us about the FISA warrant process from an IG perspective. I'm hoping that Attorney General Barr will appoint somebody to look back and see if there was criminality. I can promise you, as oversight chairman, we're going to dig deep to find out how it got so off the rails and take corrective action if necessary. We're going to do that because the rule of law cannot survive against mob rule. The confirmation process was attacked viciously, and it barely withstood the attack. Campaigns are going to be targeted by foreign governments in the future. We need to have rules that are fair and will work for both sides. The FISA court is an important tool. It cannot be abused for political purposes. Somebody has to watch those who watch us. We have separate branches of government for a reason. I'm going to try to inform you the best I can what happened in 2016. No reasonable person doubts that Mr. Mueller was not well qualified, because he is. No reasonable person doubts that after 2 years and $25 million and 40 FBI agents, the verdict is in on the Trump campaign. And no reasonable person should not want the Congress and others to figure out how this happened. So I am going to go on that journey. I'm going to do it as much in collaboration with my Democratic colleagues as possible. I don't have anybody to punish, no one to reward. I'm trying to find out what happened so it doesn't ever happen again. And I'm going to do other things on the committee. We're going to deal with the problems that matter to you, like a broken immigration system. We're going to fix the loopholes if we can. That if you're from the Northern Triangle countries and you can bring an unaccompanied child, you bring a minor child with you as a family, you're never going to get deported, because we can't send you back because you're a non-contiguous nation, and people are taking advantage of that. Unaccompanied children are coming by the thousands. They can't be deported unless they're from Mexico or Canada. 98% never leave the country. I can only imagine the journey. We have magnets in our laws on asylum. If you put 1 foot in the country and claim a credible fear, you stay. There's no bed space to keep you. We let you out, and you never come back. That's chaos, right? We need to fix that. I want to fix immigration from a wider perspective. I want merit-based immigration. I want E-Verify. I want walls at work. I want visas overstays to stop. I want more legal immigration. As to the 11 million, if you're a non-felon, you can stay, learn the language, pay a fine, get in the back of the line, don't cut in front. We'll fix this. I just don't want 11 million 20 years from now. We're going to deal with social media. What are the privacy rules? We have none. Who takes down content? Is it because of a liberal bias in California, or is there some guidance we should give these social media companies about how to affect your Twitter account or your social media posting? When it comes to protecting these platforms from foreign interference, are we doing enough? No. So the whole area of social media is pretty much unregulated, and I believe in free enterprise, but I also believe in responsibility. We're going to do something about extreme risk orders. We're not going to have a national standard or a national law, but we're going to encourage states to allow police officers to petition courts in their state when there's sign as somebody is about to blow and kill us, kill people, that they can stop them before it's too late with ample due process. We're going to do stuff that matters as much as we can, as often as we can, as bipartisan as we can. But we're not going to be deterred by a media that is going nuts when it comes to Trump and about a Democratic Party that cannot apparently reach much across the aisle because it's Trump. We're not going to let that deter us from finding out the truth about what happened in 2016. And when it comes to judges, more solid conservatives. End on this thought. Everybody in this room has a unique responsibility now. Because there is no requirement to get a vote from the minority party, it is important for us to send to the president names of people who are highly qualified conservatives. Since you don't have to have a one Democratic vote to get a judge confirmed, and it may be reverse here soon, down the road, who knows, it puts pressure on all of us to make sure that the people we send are not ideologues, solid conservatives. The biggest fear I have about the rules change is that over time, the hardest of the hard in both parties are going to drive judicial nominations. You don't have to collaborate anymore. You don't need 60 votes. All you need is within the party in charge. So my fear is that the judiciary is going to become more ideological. And the only way to prevent that is have the party in charge to have some discipline. This is where the National Republican Lawyers Association is important. You need to help me and the president to make sure that we are filling these vacancies with highly qualified people like Brett Kavanaugh. And on our watch, to set a standard that is sustainable. My goal as chairman of the Judiciary Committee is, when this is all over, the way I conduct myself in the committee is sustainable over time. Thank you very much.
The Edwin Meese III Award is bestowed on an individual who has upheld the rule of law in the face of adverse political challenges. Senator Graham, this year's recipient, was chosen in recognition of his strong defense of the rule of law during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings and throughout his distinguished career. Mr. Meese would have liked to be present, but unfortunately was unable to attend today, and so he sent a letter that I will read shortly. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge that for many of us in the Republican Party, you have become the voice of the Republican Party. And personally, I'd like to thank you for your courage and extraordinary leadership in the Kavanaugh hearings. You added that it was also Senator Collins, so I'd like to say that you and Senator Collins gave us a kind of result that we as a party and the nation needed to see. Thank you, sir. Edwin Meese wrote, "Dear Senator Graham, it is a pleasure for me to join your colleagues and friends in honoring you with the Republican National Lawyers Association Award for your distinguished service to our country and to the legal profession. Although a long-time commitment to being in California prevents me from being with you in person, I wanted to express my congratulations to you and my appreciation for your outstanding public service. During your remarkable career, you have distinguished yourself by your continual integrity, patriotism, and numerous professional accomplishments. Over the course of your 33-year career in the United States Air Force, serving both as a military prosecutor and defense attorney, you set an excellent example for lawyers of our nation. Since being elected to Congress nearly 25 years ago, you have been an unwavering defender of our national security, leader on foreign policy, and committed to solving the problems that face our nation. You now serve in an important position as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee in the 116th Congress. In all these capacities, you have demonstrated great courage and a commitment to constitutional government and the rule of law. Congratulations on receiving this prestigious award. Best wishes for continued success. Sincerely, Edwin Meese III. Please join me in thanking Senator Graham.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm not so sure I deserve the award, but I don't deserve all the crap I get, so I'll take it. Thanks,
Senator?
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we ended a little bit early, but Professor Wallace is going to take over now.
It's not going to match the rule of law. It's going to be about CLE. Just to remind you several things. If you want CLE credit from Virginia, New Jersey, or New York, you have to sign in for it. You have a CLE form. If you don't, you've got to get it, and you should turn it in before you go. If you have any questions about CLE, and I don't know very much about it, you should ask Lisa Dixon or Rich Kozlowski. And the other thing I mentioned before is keep your badges through the party. Our next moderator is going to be Peter Robinson. I don't know whether he is here. Are you Peter? I'm going to introduce him and you can take over. We're going to try to move as quickly as possible so that everyone will have as much time as they want as we go along. Peter is a partner of King & Spalding, a large international firm. He has served in the Georgia legislature, and it's my pleasure to introduce him. Peter?
It's my pleasure to be here today to introduce one of my good friends, and that's Doug Collins, ranking member on House Judiciary. Doug represents Georgia 9. He represents the community. He embodies the community. He's a lawyer. He's a Baptist minister. He's an active lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and he's going to leave here and go to drill as soon as he finishes this weekend. He's a husband. He's a father. He trained where I met him first in the state legislature. He did an excellent job. He was a floor leader for one of our joint mentors, former Governor Nathan Deal, former Congressman Nathan Deal, someone who's influenced him a lot and who's influenced me. What makes Doug special in Georgia is that he truly personifies the community he grew up in. He represents the community he grew up in. He represents the very best characteristics of the work ethic. He was ministering to his church while going to law school, while helping his wife run family businesses. He is always working. He was representing his House district while finishing his law degree, starting his law practice. I admire the fact that he's been a small town practitioner. We have that in common. We've both been sole practitioners, and now we work on different stages. He represents the faith and values of the district. He met his wife in the church in the district. He's a multitasker, And he's just, I think you're going to find as he develops in this job as minority leader and hopefully as ranking member and hopefully as chair someday soon, you're going to see somebody who's very special. And if you are talking to him and he starts his aw shucks, buckle your seatbelt, because you're going to find that he's not all shucking. He's really going to come in. He's got some agenda. My pleasure to represent a good friend, Doug Collins, Georgia 9.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. There we go. I like it. Let's do it one more time. Good morning. Well, we get it all rolling this morning. If you have to follow Senator Graham, you got to do something to get things going. I mean, Senator Graham is just doing a phenomenal job. I look forward to the day soon that it is Chairman Graham in the Senate and Chairman Collins in the House, and let's get things done again as we look forward to that. Well, Pete, I appreciate that introduction. Some of you have gotten to know me just in that brief introduction. Every time that my family hears that, and especially my father hears my introduction, he talks about where I've been over the last 25, 30 years of my professional life. Sometimes he just looks at me and says, Doug, someday you'll actually find a job, and we appreciate that. My wife, thankfully, she keeps up with me as we go. For many of you, your first introduction to me has been the last quarter of having to fight the tip of the spear in the House Judiciary Committee. It's been an interesting time to go and fight about everything that is going on that we wish we could actually do, but we can't. Because right now Chairman Nadler is on a fishing expedition to nowhere. In fact, just the other day when we decided to do preemptive subpoenas, now I'm in a group with the National Republican lawyers, and I want to just talk to you for a second. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'm not by any means claiming to be the best lawyer in the world. But subpoenas are supposed to be used for when you don't get what you want, not beforehand when people are cooperating with you. The House Republican, we sit there every week and watch our colleagues on the Democratic side of this committee, Chairman Nadler, at first threaten subpoenas, then try to issue subpoenas, then they back off subpoenas, then they ask for something and somebody says, I'll work with you and I'll give you documents. And they said, well, that's not good enough. We're going to threaten you with another subpoena. When you have this kind of dysfunction going on, it makes it really hard to operate. And what I have found out is I believe it's no longer a fishing expedition. As I said just the other day, I believe what's happened is the fishing expedition has went dry, and it's like the old boy who was sitting in the middle of the pond. He run out of bait, he run out of everything else, but he was hungry, he needed something, so he just took out a stick of dynamite and threw it in the pond and said, I'm going to try any way possible to get what I want. This is what's dominated us for the last quarter. In addition, we've also been dominated by very badly written law. This should concern every lawyer of any stripe and basically every citizen of our country. We have had bills written in which the authors did not understand what was actually in the bill. The gun legislation, they did not realize that the way they had written the bill could get you up to a $100,000 fine. They tried to make fun of it on the floor. When we pointed it out, they shut up and never said anything else about it. And they said, well, we really don't care. When we brought our election bill to the floor, I pointed out that you missed the word in there, and when it talked about keeping somebody from voting, not exercising their voting rights, you are now guilty of a felony. So in other words, if I stopped my 4-year-old nephew or an uncle or a cousin, if they were 4 or 14 and I stopped them from voting, I've now committed a felony under their law. When I pointed this out, they just shrugged. This is not how you legislate. We can have different ideas in this country. We can have other ideas that I may agree on, they may agree on. They won the majority. I would like to see them at least move forward in a rational way in which they actually know what they're doing instead of simply legislating by political talking points and press releases. And that's where we're at right now. But this morning I also want to take just a moment just to sort of see what I see is the problem in Washington, D.C. right now. And for this association, just to let you know, over the last few years, we have become a problematic organization of Congress, both the House and the Senate, because we have forgotten the main thing that we were sent here to do. The main thing that we are sent here to do, think about this for just a second, for those of us who served in legislative bodies in the state level and also on the federal level now, the main number one job of a congressperson or a senator is to legislate. is to actually understand legislation, to actually look at the laws and to look at the problems in our country and to find solutions and legislate that by saying, I have an idea, you have an idea, let's come together and see how we can make this country better. The problem we're seeing now is most legislators are not, that's just not what they want to do. It's much easier to do a press release, it's much easier to do a press conference, it's much easier to go do other things than do the hard work of legislation. My career in Congress is only 6 years. And in that 6 years, we've had 3 or 4 major pieces of legislation that were bipartisan pieces of legislation in which we took on criminal justice reform. The First Step Act was a genesis of an idea that took over 5 years in creation and working with Hakeem Jeffries and others across the board so that we can actually be smart with our money and smart morally. That's what makes America the greatest place in the world. That's what we've got to be a part of. We took the copyright, the Music Modernization Act last year, which transformed, some of which was 100+ years old. We got together, took 80 organizations that, I kid you not, 6 years ago would not sit in a room like this without arguing over everything, who came together and said, this is something that moves our industry forward and moves our country forward. We need to have this happen. Whatever happened to legislating? You know why it's not? It's hard work. Legislating is not easy. Democracy is not easy. You have to convince people of your ideas. And I will tell you, as a Republican Lawyers Association, it is time Republicans got back in the game and quit letting the emotional argument that is always overtaken by the other side be devoid of the facts that we have. We have facts and emotion on our side. When you have a government that is functioning, when you have deregulation that is going down, when businesses can operate, when people are valued for the value that they have as human beings, that is the best fact, and that is also the best emotion. We as Republicans, and frankly from my side of the aisle on the judiciary, we have got to get past the boring. Well, that hit you hard, didn't it? We're boring. Well, today we have a new economic forecast. Look at the PowerPoint. Click. Oh, 3.8% growth. That's wonderful. Why do we do that? We go another chart. We go into organizations and we start citing statistics and graphs, and I could bore you to death this morning, but there's not enough coffee in my life that could sit here to want to bore you to death. I'm a Southern Baptist minister. I can give you the best 30-minute nap you've ever had in your life. But you know, that's not what moves America. Our leadership on all levels, from our president on down, we have to make the case that our facts and our ideas are the best because they help people. And the Judiciary Committee, I cannot think of a better place for us to do that. So I am calling upon my chairman. Let's get about the business of fixing our intellectual property system. Let's get about the business of fixing and continuing to fix our criminal justice system. Let's get about the business of doing America's work and stop the political soundbite and press release mentality. When we do that, then we have a chance to change the world. So from us, from my perspective, when we start talking about things like criminal justice reform, we start talking about deregulation. Why not, instead of saying, well, we're talking about the Chevron doctrine today, and we're really concerned the Supreme Court really needs to overturn Chevron. I agree with you. Okay, let's get past that. I agree with you. But what does it matter at the Waffle House in Gainesville, Georgia? I go into the Waffle House and I say the Chevron doctrine is really causing your business problem. Joanne, did you know that? It's tough. Joanne's having a great waffle at this point. She don't care. And I tell her, your business is going to be good. I'm a Republican. Vote for me. You bet. Okay. Easy vote. No, it is. She's looking at me like, Chevron. Wait, I just stopped at the Gulf station just down the road. What's wrong with Chevron? We don't understand it anymore. We've got to make sure that Republicans are actually, and I think conservatives are speaking languages that people understand. So what a better idea would be to go in and say, you know something, we, over this administration, the Trump administration has cut regulation, has made it better, that the only thing that we can now do is that businesses operate more efficiently. Get the regulatory out of the problem, let them operate in the way that they should, safely, economically, and do the things that businesses do. I've never met a business in my life that actually wanted to hurt their employees. I've never had a business in my life that wanted to hurt their bottom line. If they did, they didn't stay in business long. So why don't we just go into that same agenda, and then we go into the same people and we say, you know why we talk about deregulation in Washington, D.C.? Because last week I was talking to a business owner named Jim. And Jim was looking at it, and he actually told me, as I was walking around, he said, I'm going to be able to add a new piece of machinery because when the tax cuts went in and when deregulation, that I didn't have to go through another step, I can now actually add an employee. So you see Susie over there? Susie has a job now because of what you did in Washington, D.C. It's time we start taking the message that we all know and applying it in such a way that people can understand. When we do that as leaders, that is called leadership. That is called navigating. That is saying what we do matters, and it matters to the people we're elected by. I love Washington, D.C. and the work here that I get to do. I miss desperately the love of my life, Lisa, when I fly out of Atlanta and I fly up here and I get to go back home. I vote in Georgia. I'm from Northeast Georgia, 52 years of what I believe is one of the best districts in the world. And the people there are the ones who vote for me. If you ever disconnect where you're from to coming up here, you end up with the mess we're in right now. The last thing I'll just sort of say is Washington needs to go back and watch a few more Schoolhouse Rock videos. I'm pretty simple. I'm a state trooper's kid from North Georgia. Just make it simple. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. Now it's just a bill. This is like, they don't sit on Capitol Hill anymore. We just sit around. We got to get back to an executive that understands its constitutional role, any executive, that is to administer the laws, not make them up. We need a Congress that says, instead of worrying about a bill and how it may be interpreted, make a law that makes sense, that takes into account the needs of our country and the needs of those around the world, and make it clear so that the executive can carry it out. And, by the way, we do need a judicial system that says it's time to stop giving the Chevron and other deferences back to the administration. We've got to get back to the way that our founders set it up. When we get back to that, then we have the functioning democracy that we have, that constitutional democracy that has made us literally the brightest light in the world for so many years. It's why our businesses, it's why our intellectual property, it's why the folks in the world want to come here. So I want to leave you this morning with just a little bit of this. We, as Republican lawyers, on my committee, you're going to see me do two things. And I've told the chairman this on many occasions. Mr. Chairman, when you're ready to legislate, you'll find no harder worker than Doug Collins. But if you want to continue to go down this road that you're on, then you're going to find me, and you're going to hear some country analogies, and I'm going to fight back because I'll refuse to let this country get dragged down the path of divisiveness and hatred and other things when we can do so much better. That's leadership. That's where we need to be. God bless you, and thank you so much.
Told the congressman, I wish I were a Southern Baptist. I hope we can keep up with kind of the Lindsey Graham, Congressman Collins level. We're running well ahead of our schedule, which is good. I've been asked to invite all the moderators and introducers, all the way down to Rev Brownell, to come up here to the platform. I think we'll have enough chairs for you, so why don't we wait for you all to come up here, and then we'll get on to the next session. Sit wherever you want. Actually, hi, David. I think you're next, aren't you? We're next. I'll introduce you in about 2 minutes. Nice to see you. It's good to see you too. I know the panel will be excited. I doubt it. It'll be fun to try. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I think it'll be more here. I think it'll be more.
Is your name?
Hey, Paul, how you doing? Good to see you.
In your travels?
We are.
Oh, thanks. My wife tells me better than I deserve.
Yeah, very good fellow. Tax lawyer, actually, by training. I think we can get going. Hi, I'm Don Wallace.
Hey, John, Paul Collins.
Me too.
Chris Pilkington, how are you? This class. Yeah. There. There you go. I think this is impression. Okay. I think I've had lights this bright since information hearing.
We'll try to keep to this schedule because there will be speakers later on who may not be quite as precise. We're now coming to plenary session 3. Our moderator is David Bauscher, who is the first vice president of the Republican National Lawyers Association. He's a partner of Adams and Reese. So, David, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Professor. I'm David Bauscher. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and partner at Adams and Reese. And also had the privilege of serving under President Bush as the Deputy and Acting General Counsel at the Commerce Department. Thus, it's really a distinct pleasure to moderate and introduce this panel of agency general counsels discussing deregulation under President Trump and their role as GCs. We've got 3 great panelists up here, and I'll just mention them briefly, although I'm sure that you're all literate and can read their names off of the little table cards in front of them as well. We've got Steve Bradbury from Transportation, Paul Compton from HUD, and Chris Pilkington from SBA. Rather than spend a lot of time telling you where they went to school and what they did before their current gigs, I think it makes sense to really dive in because there's a lot of meat in this discussion, and these guys are on the front lines of deregulation in this administration and can really talk to you about the yeoman's work being done in the trenches on advancing the ball. So with that, Steve, do you want to kick things off? Tell folks a little bit about transportation and your role there.
People ready for Chevron? Not too much. Well, David didn't mention anything about background. Before this administration, in Bush 43, I had the great privilege for almost 5 years of heading up the Office of Legal Counsel at DOJ, which is a super cool office. That's the office that gives legal opinions on sort of the hardest questions of all to the president, heads of executive offices. It's kind of a dream job for constitutional law nerds. I thought it'd be the best job I'd ever have. But actually being general counsel of DOT is more interesting and more fun in a lot of ways. And really the reason for that is because the Department of Transportation is, as most people I think know, certainly a lot of lawyers in this town, is a heavy regulatory department, has a lot of very serious safety-focused mandates, some consumer protection mandates. It regulates a lot of major industries and transportation sectors across the country that touch the lives of every single American. And every day we address very interesting policy issues in all of these areas. A lot of them are technical, engineering focused, issues I'd never had to deal with before. something new and interesting almost every day. Sometimes disasters like the recent plane crashes have taken a lot of focus and attention for Secretary Chao and the FAA and all the folks at DOT. But being general counsel of the department involves me in a lot of those regulatory policy decisions. I'm part of the Secretary's senior staff and involved in decision-making on policy issues. I'm the regulatory policy officer for DOT. And part of what that means is in this administration, we've ensured that every single regulatory action that any component of DOT takes comes up through the General Counsel's office for review and clearance, except where there's an imminent safety need and there's some other practical consideration that requires immediate action. And then every rulemaking gets approved by the Secretary. And this includes not just the economically significant or significant rules as categorized by the Office of Management and Budget, but also non-significant rules. So now every rulemaking comes up through the General Counsel's office. We have staff in our Office of Regulation that reviews it, interfaces when necessary with the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, within OMB for that cost-benefit analysis and consistency review for the executive branch. And then we push it forward to the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary for approval. So there are a super interesting range of challenging policy issues that I get to grapple with every day, and relying on some really accomplished and experienced senior lawyers and other senior career staff at DOT. So it's a fascinating job. It puts us and puts our office right in the middle of the regulatory reform initiative that the President has put so much priority and emphasis on. And, every administration, regardless of party, talks the talk in terms of regulatory reform. You'll hear the same rhetoric from each administration about the need to ensure that regulations are narrowly tailored, that they're focused, that they're well supported factually, that they address issues that really need to be addressed and are cost justified. But in this administration, we're really taking those principles seriously, and the President has endeavored to institutionalize and create a framework to ensure some discipline so that agencies and departments across the executive branch really focus on those principles, take them seriously, and implement them. So we're trying to walk the walk. And of course, in the very early days of the administration, the President issued 2 executive orders to create this structural framework, sort of systemic reform, 13771 and 13777, these executive orders. And what they did was require some simple structural rules to impose discipline in the process, to ensure that when an agency adopts a significant new regulation that imposes, for example, estimated costs of $100 million or more annually on the economy, or creates other significant implications, that the agency also needs to identify 2 other deregulatory actions the agency will take to remove or loosen unnecessary regulatory burdens. Number 2, that when the agencies regulate across the executive branch, each department, each agency needs to ensure a 0 net increase in the regulatory costs imposed by its regulations, a regulatory budget requirement. And then the President required that to implement this, each department set up a regulatory reform task force within the department of senior officials and a regulatory policy or a regulatory reform officer to oversee this process. So we've done that at DOT. DOT, as I said, is a pretty heavy regulatory department, so it's a rich environment to consider and reconsider whether our rules are really focused, are they necessary, are they based on the best data and evidence, are there alternatives that are less burdensome that would accomplish the safety or other policy goal that we want to accomplish? Have they been exposed sufficiently to public participation and input in the process? And we're doing that very systematically across the department, and we've taken many, many actions in this area. And I will have to say that The 2-for-1 requirement, the zero net regulatory cost budget requirement have not imposed any difficulty at all in our department in meeting those requirements. Last year, as reported in the President's fall regulatory agenda, the Department of Transportation was not 2-for-1 in its deregulatory versus regulatory rules. We were 23-to-1, really with no difficulty at all analyzing finding regulatory requirements that very smartly and intelligently could be revised in some way to provide greater flexibility, to loosen certain requirements that were not enhancing safety and were just creating unnecessary burdens. It's not a difficult task. So far, cumulatively in this administration, we are at, our count cumulatively is 46-to-3. So in other words, 46 deregulatory actions have been finalized versus 3 significant new regulatory requirements. These regulatory requirements include new safety management plans for transit, safety management plans in the pipeline industry, and we obviously are working on some important regulatory mandates that will be coming out that are necessary, are consistent with statutory requirements and the Constitution that make a lot of sense and will improve safety, and those will be coming. But at the same time, we're working on some really major regulatory reform items. And some of these items have the potential to increase the regulatory cost savings that we will achieve by orders of magnitude. So this year in FY 2019, we've committed under the President's regulatory reform agenda to achieving net cost savings for the U.S. economy of $2 billion in net present value. We're already at more than $1.1 billion in this fiscal year in terms of regulatory actions we've completed. We have the potential with just one rule, the safer, affordable, fuel-efficient vehicles rule, the Safe Vehicles Rule, which addresses the corporate average fuel economy standards for the U.S. That's a joint rulemaking between DOT and between NHTSA and EPA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and EPA. This is a comprehensive reset of the fuel economy standards for U.S. automobiles. That rule alone, as proposed, it's not final yet. It's still under consideration. We're working, take into account all the comments we've received, and it will be finalized, we expect, later this year. But as proposed, it would be estimated to achieve cost savings for the U.S. economy in the order of greater than $250 billion. And this is because the standards that were in place under the previous administration have been determined to be unachievable in terms of cost savings or mileage gains, and the expense for putting in place technology to try to achieve those current mandates would impose costs that would, on average, result in more than $2,000 in additional costs per vehicle produced. And so the cost savings from that, from a determination that that technology is not going to achieve those savings, it's not going to be cost beneficial. So many things in the economy have changed in terms of fuel prices and otherwise. Resetting the standards to be more realistic, more achievable, will achieve enormous cost savings for consumers and will actually enable more consumers to buy newer vehicles sooner, and older, less safe vehicles will get off the road quicker. And those will have real not only cost savings for consumers, but also savings in terms of safety benefits. Several other rules are in the mix. I just want to mention streamlining for commercial space launches. We've published a notice of a proposed rule there that will take what were old-fashioned 1970s DoD-based launch and reentry rules that if you stacked them up paper-wise would be about this thick, and we're streamlining them down greatly, consistent with the existing practices, because of course, as everybody knows, we're having 1, 2, 3, 4 commercial space launches a week now in this country, and the FAA approves each of those launches and reentries. So we have a major streamlining rule. This is just a couple of examples of some of the things we're working on to achieve enormous cost savings and regulatory benefits in terms of loosening those burdens for the U.S. economy. And I think the results are already pretty evident in terms of job creation and economic stimulation for the economy as a result of just a smarter, more focused approach to regulation. So that's my opening pitch, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And just to clarify, I think what we're trying to do is get a brief introduction to each of these agencies and the role of OGC there, but then really have a conversation amongst these guys and frankly with y'all as well to talk about this more in the nitty-gritty. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about HUD and what you're doing there?
Sure, happy to. Delighted to be here today with you. I'm a little different, I guess, from Steve's background. I was in private practice for 29 years, so this is my second job since law school. And so I bring a little bit of a different perspective. I did a lot of work in affordable housing, mortgage securitization, manufactured housing, which are kind of the bread and butter of what HUD does. What I find as general counsel, though, I spend most of my time on personnel procurement and responding to various FOIA and other types of inquiries. But on the substantive side, I think the first thing with respect to HUD is that I have recognized is that HUD's really just a very large financial institution. What is common to the public is really a relatively small part of what we do. We have significant philanthropic and enforcement functions, philanthropic in the grant area and public housing, enforcement in the fair housing arena. But really our bread and butter is we have what is in effect a $2+ trillion balance sheet. And so much of our activity is actually what is kind of quasi-contractual in nature when we think about on the regulatory side. We are setting forth credit quality standards for parties that we're in a contractual relationship with, because we take loans that they make, and if they meet our conditions, which we in a regulatory, again, quasi-contractual way set, we stamp with an uncontestable guarantee the full faith and credit of the United States. And so we take that part seriously. If we have 50 basis points of loss on our balance sheet, that's more than our entire budget for the year. So credit quality is really important to us, and that's an emphasis that we've had in the administration, is making sure that we are solid in that area because of the risks that it poses to the taxpayer. The other things, as Steve laid out, we're doing the same things. We have a regulatory reform task force. One of the things that we have, because of these kind of quasi-contractual relationships that we have, we also, in addition to that, have a relatively unusual arrangement because most of our funds otherwise flow through other governmental entities. That is, they flow through public housing authorities, they flow through cities and states on the community block grant side. And so we really don't deal with the end user very much. We don't run any homeless shelters. We fund a lot of homeless shelters. And so we have an attenuated relationship in how our regulations work because many of them are effectively kind of pass-throughs that are ultimately implemented by another governmental entity. And so as a result of that, we have historically kind of gathered a lot of what in kind of current parlance is sub-regulatory guidance. We sometimes call them directives. They go by a lot of names, some you don't want to repeat in polite company. But we have really engaged in trying to clear what I refer to as kind of the regulatory underbrush. And I think that we just this week published a notice where we withdrew 670 pieces of either obsolete or unhelpful guidance. And I had charged our folks initially with trying to find at least 100. We found 670, and we realized in this process this is just phase one. And there is just a tremendous volume of things out there which I think are unhelpful to the public and frankly very unhelpful to you as lawyers, because you can find something out there that supports almost every position that you want to take. But unfortunately about 2/3 of them are actually incorrect. And so we're going to continue on that process. And you know, as we go on, I'll be happy to share too some of the kind of I guess principles that I've learned and kind of the tensions that we have, as well as what in our review of regulations that aren't doing what they need to do, some thoughts about how we got to that place. So thank you again, happy to be here.
I guess I'm next up. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Chris Pilkerton, and I'm the General Counsel at the Small Business Administration. By way of background, I was a district attorney in Manhattan, an enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as working in compliance at a large bank. And those three roles really prepared me for the role at the Small Business Administration. And it really is the job of a lifetime. Working with Administrator McMahon has been just really a tremendous experience. And as the administrator always says, her goal was to make sure that SBA was no longer the best kept secret in the government. And I think she's achieved a lot of that during her tenure. But I will do my best sales pitch as well right now. So everyone knows about SBA loans, which obviously we're a loan. We're not necessarily a direct loan-making institution, like Paul was saying. We guarantee loans. We have delegated lenders, which is about 80% of our portfolio. So if someone walks into a commercial bank, a certain percentage of that, assuming they meet the obligations and standards, is guaranteed by the federal government. The only direct loans that we make are during the disaster program and disasters, which we have a pretty significant program and work hand in hand with HUD as well. We also, as many of you know, oversee the government contracting program for small businesses for the government. Under statute, approximately 23% of all government contracts that are able to go to small businesses are mandated to do so. So we work directly with all of the agencies and put out a scorecard to ensure that we're working with those folks, and we have folks within all the different agencies that we work with directly on that. We also have something called the Small Business Investment Company Program, where it's small funds that are making direct investments into small businesses, and they receive leverage from the government, a guaranteed leverage as well. And as part of that same office, we also have an innovation research, kind of think incubator concept, where if a different agency is trying to develop something, they're called the SBIR and the STTR programs. So we work very closely on that. And then we have a separate office within the SBA, but it's it's a separate office from the rest of the institution called the Office of Advocacy. It's independent, and it conducts reviews of every new rule across the entire government that might affect small businesses. So from a day-to-day perspective, in my role, I have about 150 lawyers, about half here in DC, and the other half are spread across our 68 district offices across the US. In my role, we touch all of these programs that I was telling you about. So we see a lot of the rules, all the rules that are coming through. Like Steve had mentioned, I'm also the regulatory reform officer, so I've played a significant role there as well. And we've looked at every single one of our rules, and to date, having looked at everything, we've identified just under 10% of rules within the SBA that we're going to be seeking to remove over the next year to 18 months. So we were proud to have gone through that entire process, and it really was a great team process, so we're very happy about that. I think one of the other things that we're working on as well at the SBA is trying to be an agency leader in the area of risk management. A lot of rules and regulations come from, pending risks and concerns, but we've tried to develop a very robust enterprise risk management system, and that's been across the entire agency. So there are some mandates, Fraud Reduction Act, some other things that have kind of mandated the enterprise risk component. But we've really been working hard on that, and we feel that that will not only strengthen the agency, but strengthen the end product to our customers, because we really are customer-facing to the American public. So our next phase of regulatory reform will be to look at literally the forms and things that people are filling out when they're trying to get a loan or trying to take advantage of our services. We've got other folks that are out there in the field, our small business development centers, our SCORE representatives that are out there just meeting folks and trying to help them start small businesses. So under Administrator McMahon's leadership, we're very pleased with what's happened to date, and we're looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Well, I'll start off kind of the next phase. Steve, you have recently put out some documents at Transportation that bear directly on regulatory reform. I'd be interested in hearing you talk about that, and I suspect that while there are a handful of folks in the audience that may know about it, most folks probably don't.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, exactly. To sort of move forward in institutionalizing the regulatory reform process that we're applying, we've put pen to paper and put out in recent months 3 documents that are publicly available that help to sort of put down in very clear procedural terms the steps and requirements for a more disciplined process to ensure greater integrity and reasonableness in both our regulatory actions and our enforcement actions. So one document is a comprehensive new order, departmental order, that sets out from soup to nuts our current updated process for rulemaking at DOT. And it starts out with all of the policies and principles that I described and more for focusing and ensuring integrity and reasonableness in rulemaking, that rules should be necessary and they should, you should focus on the most effective alternative approach, that they should be based on a rigorous assessment of costs and benefits, that the predicted benefits of the rule should outweigh those costs, and that the rule should be based on a reasonable and faithful interpretation of statutory authority. So this is kind of where Chevron comes in. We're not going to use Chevron deference. That's the deference that courts give to the expert regulator, so that the court is not replacing the regulator's judgment with the court's own judgment, which is a healthy principle in terms of judicial review. But we're not going to rely on that deference to expand and push the envelope in terms of what our regulations will try to do. Instead, we'll base them on a faithful, reasonable interpretation of what the statute really was intended to authorize. Of course, they have to be consistent with the Constitution. And then for rules that are going to impose greater burdens, greater costs, we're going to have more process. We're going to have more opportunity for public comment. For the highest impact rules, we're going to provide for formal hearings where there are technical or complex factual issues at that are in dispute, that may have a significant material effect on the outcome of the rulemaking. We'll provide for hearings and before administrative officers, and the results of those hearings will be folded into the rulemaking record to help inform the record. We also have set forth the procedures for the Regulatory Reform Task Force and the roles that each of the officers on the task force perform in that process and the review of all the rules and that I described before. So it's a comprehensive order that replaces all previous rulemaking orders for DOT. Number two, I've issued a general counsel memo to the whole department on the review and clearance of guidance documents. As Paul mentioned, guidance documents are often a significant part of what agencies do in the regulatory arena. And these are documents that don't impose a legal obligation like a rule, but may describe what the agency thinks the regulated entities should do in carrying out a regulatory requirement. So, for example, if the rule says you have to have good accounting of your business through accounting, regulatory accounting principles, a guidance document might say, if you have 2 sets of independent accountants, we'll assume you have good accounting in place. So a regulated entity that wants to stay on the good side with the agency, in that instance, it may well take on the cost of hiring 2 sets of outside accountants. So they've incurred a regulatory cost to conform their conduct to what the agency has announced it thinks you should do. And even though it's not a legal requirement, a legally binding requirement, it is imposing costs. So guidance documents need to be considered in that light. There's long been a good guidance practice bulletin put out by OMB, but it's not very faithfully followed across the government. So we've got a new process in place to review and clear guidance documents that ensures that some assessment is made of the potential costs that will be imposed by guidance, that where the costs are going to be significant like that, we're going to put those guidance documents out for comment where it's practical to do so and take those comments into account. We're going to make all of the guidance documents publicly available on websites for the department, and we're going to put the significant guidance for review over at OIRA at OMB and put it up the chain through review within leadership at DOT. So that's going to be, in certain respects, a sea change in how we approach guidance documents, but very consistent with the President's priorities and Secretary Chow's focus on being more efficient and smart in how we regulate. The third document relates to enforcement actions. Obviously, a big part of what agencies like ours do is take administrative enforcement actions or other civil enforcement actions through court. And this is a memo that ensures that in our enforcement actions at DOT, we're going to provide for due process, fair notice to parties, an opportunity for parties to let us know their views and for that to be taken into account, a correct approach to how we order and administer enforcement actions. And we're also adopting as a policy matter a kind of Brady rule in civil enforcement actions that we will share material information we're aware of that may be in favor of the regulated party and give some advance heads up as to what the basis is for a proposed enforcement action. All 3 of these documents are available on the website at DOT for anybody to review, and we'd love to hear if you have comments on them or suggestions for improvements to the process. I have emailed to Joanne links to all 3 of those documents this morning so she can make those available to those who may be interested. And one final point on these 3 policy documents, we are planning to codify all 3 of them in regulations at DOT. So we'll be moving forward with that process later this year to help in the way of institutionalizing these principles and firming them up so that they'll be durable, we hope, and continue into future administrations. Thanks, David.
It's interesting to me, given my former role, to hear these guys talk about what they're doing, and one of the things that I think you're hearing, and I certainly experienced, was that frankly, there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, not just at SBA, but at each of the agencies, figuring out new and better ways to govern and to discharge the responsibilities that the President and the Congress have given these agencies. One of the things that I think most of us know about OMB and the interagency process that gets spearheaded there, I suspect that a lot of folks don't know, though, about something that I experienced and that y'all are a part of now, kind of the General Counsel's Council, or the General Counsel's group, and was wondering if y'all could talk about, Chris, Paul, Steve, talk about how y'all get together, not just inside your agencies, but with each other and share. I mean, Steve just kind of laid out these 3 things that he's done at transportation, and everybody's coming up with good ideas, everybody's coming up with innovations, and how these all get shared across the agencies. I don't know, Paul, Chris, what do y'all want to?
Yeah, well, I'm delighted with the efforts that Steve is taking at DOT, because I plan to crib off of them. We have something called a directives handbook, and it gets updated apparently about every 10 years. And the current version, though, I think is still written in 12-point Courier. And so many of the thoughts that Steve has in his guidance approaches are things that we're going to find very helpful. The administration has generally been active in this guidance area. Directives are kind of another broader term for sub-regulatory guidance. And the Attorney General Sessions issued a very important memo early in the administration about the treatment of guidance, and it's something that we take very seriously, that guidance really should generally at most be viewed as a shield and not a sword. But it is through, as David alluded to, the White House counsel, first Don McGahn and now Pat Cipollone, have been very good, and I guess in the interim, Emmett Flood did it as well, at convening the agency general counsels, and that's how I know Steve and Chris and others, where we have an opportunity to really kind of go around and share ideas and approaches that we have, as well as issues that come up that are going to be cross-cutting. And Chris and I have had the opportunity to collaborate on a number of things, and I think that the fact that we kind of knew each other, we have gotten to better solutions faster, hopefully. Yeah. But that is an important element. It gives us, I think, consistency in the administration as well. And so there's nothing that's really formal about that, other than folks who are trying to get to good results, sharing ideas about how to get there.
I'll just add to that. When Steve was talking about kind of institutionalizing a regulatory reform review process, I think that's really important, in large part because I think other administrations have tried to do this, but there's certainly been a very focused effort. And I would tell you this, of the 10% of rules and regs that we're looking to remove, 70% of those were deemed to be redundant and obsolete. So if there was a consistent process to remove, I think some of it, as Paul pointed out, was kind of the underbrush and some things that have just been around for a long time. I think if that's day in and day out, if agencies are doing that, that'd go a long way. But these kinds of best practices that we're talking about, as was alluded to before, really I think comes about through these conversations. In the Office of General Counsel, everybody always wants to talk to the lawyer, right? So the lawyer always knows a lot of things that are going on in the agency. And that's really helpful, because when you're having these conversations about if this is something that's happening in my agency, and we'll be sitting around the table talking about these, gives you the opportunity to ask a question at the table, but then as Paul mentioned, follow up and really try to learn these best practices. So I hope it continues, and I think it will.
Chris, and I'll put this to each of you, but I'll start with you, Chris. What's been the reaction inside the building with the deregulatory agenda? My suspicion from my time at Commerce is that if I had said, we're going to get rid of 2 regulations for every new regulation we put in place, that, I would have had people's heads exploding at the thought of it. But then once we drilled down on it and actually started looking, well, what about this one? Oh, yeah, no, we don't need that one. Well, what about this one? No, that's probably overtaken by events. But I mean, that's speculation on my part. What are you seeing boots on the ground inside the building?
Yeah, you're spot on. I think the folks within the building have really embraced it. At the end of the day, particularly at SBA, we're judged by the end user. So we can see sort of real-time results. It's not just comments on rules, but we get feedback from our lenders, from our customers, from various groups. So if we're able to get rid of a rule and make that very clear that that's our intention, we get some very good feedback. And quite honestly, I think what we've put in place, and I will say a big part of it has been learning from my colleagues at other agencies about how to put together a true regulatory review program. Folks have really gotten on board, and it's been very positive.
One of my experiences has been is that many times this is not a red or a blue issue or a D or an R issue. It is, in part, it is just recognizing what inherent regulatory biases are, and they are, whether it's the federal government or a state government or the Italian government. It is just things that happen and that we kind of have to walk into rooms and be aware of them. And the first is that people who work for the government want rules that are really easy to implement, that are really clear-cut, and if you decide to enforce it, it's going to stick. And so the nuance that is really appropriate from a due process or that sort of standpoint, there's a real bias against that, because if you have robust protections for due process, sometimes when on the government side you really think something ought to be enforced, well, it's hard to enforce if someone has robust due process. But I think we have to be willing to kind of bear that burden, because that's the right thing to do. The next is that inside of government, to the people who are working inside of government, slow has very little cost. And we have to recognize that slow has a very distinct and pronounced cost on the people who are impacted by our rules. And that is whether we're either slow to make them or slow to pull them back. And so I think that my approach has been I kind of have to be affirmatively pushing things along, because otherwise it will not move as fast as it should. One analogy in that respect is that someone asked me, he says, well, trying to guide an agency in the federal government, is it like steering the Titanic? And I said, no, it's like steering the iceberg. All you can do is chip on one side and hope you get it kind of flowing the right way. It is, because the other element that I bring is that we talk about regulation, but it's usually not just one regulation. Now, there are exceptions to that, but it's usually not just one regulation that kind of adds to this. It is the multiplicity, and is what I kind of call the Gulliver's web of regulation. So it's not just a fair housing reg. It is what do lenders have to do to be safe and sound, laid on top of Paperwork Reduction Act requirements that say you can't ask for this or you must ask for that. And by the time you get it in a typical circumstance, it's many, many layers deep. And to that, I kind of apply my old private practice axiom, which is the complexity of any transaction goes up exponentially with the number of parties involved. And so by the time you lay 5 or 6 regs on top of each other, it's like 100 times more difficult than just having, one reg. And so that is where, when I talk about the regulatory underbrush, part of this is it's not that those things are individually very important, but the cumulative burden is certainly more than additive. And so we try to be mindful of that. Another principle that is that inside a government entity, process oftentimes overrides results. And you have a lot of talk about the process of how we're going to get a rule rather than whether it's a good rule at the end of the day. And so, I try to step back to, when I was on the other side of the fence and just read a rule and say, does this make sense? What is the average lawyer who's reading this, what are they going to take from what we're trying to do? And they may not realize that these 3 sentences had to do with this, bad APA result that happened 23 years ago in an unreported, district court case. We do try to just kind of take that step back as well on regulations, particularly those that have broader applications. So those are just some general thoughts about what we try to bring to the process, at least where I am now. And like Chris, I have, I guess we have about 400 or 500 lawyers at HUD, again, spread about equally between Washington and the rest of America.
Let me add, I guess at a Republican lawyers conference, you may not expect to hear a lot of praise for the administrative bureaucracies in Washington, but at the Department of Transportation, we are actually really fortunate to have a dedicated crew of career folks who, for the most part, are focused on real-world practical solutions and results. The engineering and science issues that affect the safety of transportation systems, and they really want to ensure that the regulatory rules we impose and enforce are effective and actually achieve a positive safety outcome and are not impeding the ability of industry to actually make the investments needed to achieve those improvements. So we're blessed with a career staff that's not very ideological in these areas. They understand the industries they regulate. They are focused on what's practical. And they've, in the past, been hearing the same direction in terms of a sensible regulatory approach and trying to minimize unnecessary burden, et cetera. So these are not new principles from their perspective, but there's a new vigor and energy and impetus behind them, for sure, in this administration. And at the same time, we're not just about deregulation, and it's quite evident to them that where it makes sense, where there's a need, and it's justified, we are moving forward with some very significant new regulatory requirements to improve safety. I mean, Secretary Chow's #1 priority is safety, and we have some significant safety enhancing projects and regulations that are on the books and in the works and in the pipeline. So it's not all just in one direction. I have within the Office of the General Counsel an Office of Regulation, and then each of our modes, each of our operating administrations like NHTSA, FAA, the Federal Railroad Administration, motor carriers, et cetera, they each have their chief counsel's offices that report up to us and their offices of regulation. And these staffs that handle the regulatory review and the regulations, they might have thought coming into the Trump administration that they might be sitting around twiddling their thumbs with not a lot to do. But I can tell you, I don't think they have ever been busier than they are now. There's just so much activity in the regulatory area. A lot of it is focused on making it better, removing unnecessary requirements to enhance the safety outcome of the rules, but again, a good amount of it is new safety enhancing regulations. So there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of dedication, and there's a lot of good people who want the right result in terms of effective regulation. So I think, you know, maybe at DOT we're blessed in that way more than some other departments, but I think it's good to know, and I don't mind saying it wherever I go, that there are a lot of good, dedicated folks who are pursuing these goals, and it's just a matter of the right direction, getting it institutionalized, having the processes in place. A lot of it is system, and I think the renewed and active focus on regulatory reform, again, you just cannot overemphasize how much of an effect it's having on the economy generally. I truly believe that. And lasting, durable, we hope, institutionalized effects going forward. Thanks.
So I'll speak for myself at least. When I think of deregulation, most of my thoughts tend toward much of what we've discussed up here, APA, notice of rulemaking, even the sub-regulatory stuff. Steve, you mentioned earlier, and when we were preparing for this, we talked about a little bit the idea of regulation through enforcement and through enforcement actions. And I'll confess that it was not something that I had really thought about enforcement as part of the regulatory regime and of necessity implicated by the idea of deregulation. But and I know one of your 3 guidance documents had to do with enforcement, but I'd be interested to hear the group talk some about, you know, kind of the idea of regulation by enforcement or not, as the case may be.
Well, let me kick that off, then I'll turn it over to Paul. That has been really one of the emphases coming from White House counsel's office in this administration. And it was very important to Don McGahn. It's important to Pat Cipollone. And that is that when we look at regulation, which means defining new regulatory requirements, these are legal requirements. These are legally binding, just like a statutory requirement. And when you're looking at revising, defining new legal requirements, you should do that through this disciplined process that gives the public and interested parties an opportunity where that's reasonable, an opportunity to have input and comment so you can consider those perspectives, different perspectives, and so you can really analyze and vet the data that your decision, you want to base your decision on, so that it's put through some test, pressure tested. These are just basic fairness principles that have been reflected in the Administrative Procedure Act since the 1940s and are well established. When you take an enforcement action based on an existing regulation, and then through that enforcement action you attempt to impose new and different legal obligations on parties, by definition, you're not going through that disciplined process of public input and vetting that you go through in a rulemaking. And sometimes regulatory enforcement actions, in fact, most times, end with some kind of settlement, some kind of compromise, some kind of consent order that sets out the requirements that the subject of the enforcement action has to comply with going forward. And sometimes, as a remedial matter, it's appropriate that those obligations on that party under that consent order go beyond what is required by existing regulations or statutes, because it's attempted to be prophylactic to ensure that the same problem doesn't arise in the future. But quite often in the past, those in consent orders, those settlements, have attempted to impose new regulatory requirements on third parties, not the entity that was that voluntarily entered into the consent order or might have been found to have violated rules. And there's an effort then to extrapolate the regulatory requirement, to widen the scope, and essentially to regulate through an enforcement action. So one of the things we've done in our memo setting forth our due process, our policies to ensure due process and enforcement actions, is we made it clear that we don't want settlement agreements, consent orders to impose new regulatory requirements on third parties that were not, you know, at issue in the enforcement action. So that's a small but I think very important step in terms of ensuring that we keep things in the right lanes, that regulation and the regulation process goes through the procedures that are important to ensure it's properly done and reasonable, and enforcement actions are not really efforts to create secret new law or efforts to play gotcha with regulatory parties and say, well, you just didn't understand what we really wanted you to do, but rather are consistent with basic principles of due process and are kept within their proper bounds as well.
I'm glad to hear the General Counsel of the Department of Transportation talk about staying in proper lanes. Sorry,
that's what we do.
Exactly. Paul, Chris?
Well, one thing I would add that's a little bit of a different angle is also at HUD, one of the things we're looking at is what are appropriate enforcement remedies, and are we being clear enough to the parties that are subject to those so that they can know what to expect? And where this is you know, most distinct is in the area of the False Claims Act. Is, I think probably most of you lawyers know, I mean, the False Claims Act dates back to the Civil War, has to do with people selling bad or rotten meat to the federal government during the Civil War, and it, in its current form, imposes treble damages for parties that make false certifications fraudulent to the government. And for HUD, where this becomes particularly pertinent, although it applies in other areas, is with respect to mortgage lending. And again, back to what I referred to as when we set the conditions for stamping the full faith and credit on payment of a mortgage, there are a number of conditions that the lender has to certify to. And up until 2011, there had been no case that applied the False Claims Act to those certifications. But since that time, there have been many cases, many involving billions of dollars in damages. And from the lending industry, there have been concerns expressed that not always were those appropriate remedies. And so that's something that we're looking, we do have a number of other remedies. So before 2011, it wasn't as if mortgage lenders could do the wrong thing and just skate. We have a mortgagee review board, which can suspend lenders. We can ask for indemnification. We can ask for corrective practices. We have a range of remedies. And one of the things that we believe strongly at HUD is that we need to better communicate what culpable conduct fits in what category. And so we are at work on that, and part of that has to do with coordinating with the Department of Justice. We don't actually bring those claims, the Department of Justice does, and so that's another element, I think, more broadly of this regulatory discussion is the degree of coordination that often has to happen across agencies, is that it's not solely our decision. It's not solely Justice's decision. There are other areas. It's not solely HUD's decision. It's not solely SBA's decision. But you know, that is another element of the enforcement regime that I think is important to look at, and one that we're taking seriously, is making sure that not only we talk about what can be enforced and what the rules are, but what the penalties may be.
Before I answer that question, I would like to wholeheartedly endorse Steve's comment regarding the career staff. SBA has a tremendous career staff. particularly in our Office of General Counsel, and they really have been tremendous on the reg reform activity. But I think it's important to note that.
What I find in our general counsel's office, because I agree with that wholeheartedly, is my lawyers get stolen and sent to other places.
We'll talk afterwards.
Have you got your eye on me?
As a former prosecutor and financial services regulator, due process has got to be the North Star, so I agree with what's been said. We have, as we talked about, we have a lot of lenders in our program, and we've had best practices that we've utilized in our Office of Credit Risk Management, which looks at all kinds of data and statistics related to different lenders. We have a robust exam schedule where we've got folks that are out at some of the banks and all the lenders on a periodic schedule. But that having been said, Congress passed the lender oversight bill last year, and we're writing rules around that now, which codifies a lot of the things that had been going on, but adds other robust components that can be utilized by the agency. So when we take actions against lenders, we actually do have a lender oversight committee that's made of folks across the agency to actually vote on it. The folks who are involved in that process are sort of made aware of deficiencies along the way. So outside of a unique set of circumstances, folks are aware of what's going on. And we work with the lenders, short of fraud or something where ultimately it's referred over to our Inspector General or to the Department of Justice. We do try to work with the lenders to see if there's ways to help them become more compliant, to provide other types of guidance. We do have the same type of tools at our disposal, whether it's the lenders or whether it's government contractors. They can be suspended or debarred as well. But I think one of the things that we also try to look at, and I mentioned this risk management component, is trying to identify trends. I think every agency and every institutions that have like parts, if we can have conversations and continue to communicate, because once you identify these trends, you can start putting controls and things around them. At SBA, we've had the opportunity to sit down with a lot of the other agencies in financial services on risk management and other issues, and try to get from them some of the things that they're doing, and they've been wonderful to work with. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about regulation and you have multiple government agencies coming into a financial institution for an examination, and when one leaves, another one comes in, what have you, if there's ways to have that be harmonized, then at the end of the day, there's less impact felt of the regulation, but it certainly demands the same type of robust system that would be required.
Well, that's great. I want to thank each of our panelists, Steve, Paul, Chris. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through what y'all are doing on the deregulatory front. Programming note here, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break as we wrap up and then reconvene at 10:55, I believe, for the next panel or the next plenary session. And Michael asked me to remind everybody, hashtag RNLA NPC, tweet it out, everybody. Thanks very much.
Oh, great.
Congratulations. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Hold on. Yeah. Didn't realize you were from Burma. Now, were you there?
So I was Homer Cutler here, and then in the administration, when that ended, but I grew up in Birmingham. Came home to Birmingham, whatever, the spring of '09. So now it was new to me then, but I was glad to see it.
Listen, that was tremendous. Walter Thatcher, in 1857, the English Constitution was a ceremonial versus the officials. And everyone knows the ceremony or theatrical. No one knows what government functions.
I didn't have a chance to work it in, but I wanted to find a way to do like the longer uniform theory of governance. Have you heard of it? Whenever someone says, well, the government should do X, you should replace government with politicians who I know were elected in the current system and subject to the indiscretions of their constituents should do X. And he said, if you phrase it that way, government has a much smaller footprint. Right. look up the unicorn theory of governance.
Like a photo. Moderator, you want to get the notes? Sure. I don't think I should be here, but I'm happy to do it.
Well, we need someone to answer.
Here we go. Let's try a couple of them. Sure. What firm were you with?
I was at Brad.
Good. One more time, please. Thanks. Thanks again. I was just the Rob Couch chair at HUD.
As I like to say.
anyway, thanks for having me. I appreciate you starting on time, you're Republicans. We're actually starting early. I got to go to the Republican Jewish Coalition today. They're everywhere. Republicans are everywhere. And RJC has been terrific. I'm headed out to Las Vegas. But again, thank you for the kind introduction. I thought I'd get right into it. We change senators at home every 50 years where we need to or not. I took I took Senator Thurman's place, and he was elected in '54. I was born in '55, so look forward to seeing you for many years to come, I hope. But Republican lawyers, Democratic lawyers, Libertarian lawyers, Vegetarian lawyers, whatever kind of lawyer, people don't like us until they need us. So if you can't take a lawyer joke, you shouldn't be a lawyer. If you can't take a joke in general, you sure as hell should not be in my business. So people laugh until they need us. Then when, you know, this whole lawyer thing, bar talk, hang 'em high. I was a military lawyer, judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, until they put a human being in front of you, then all of a sudden this gets hard when you're in a jury, right? You know, you're talking about crime until it's your grandson stopped for DUI, and you want somebody to help you. The bottom line here is the committee. I'm honored to be the chairman. And how do you get to be chairman? You outlive everybody to your right, and you keep getting elected. So it's nothing to do with merit. That's why I like the Senate. I think I picked the right place for me. So my time has come, and I'm going to try to use it wisely, and I appreciate Kevin and all those in South Carolina who've helped me. We are in kind of divided times, as you can tell. I was one of the 16 people that ran against President Trump, and you know, he beat my brains out, and he loves for me to say that, so I'm on C-SPAN in case he's watching. I acknowledge my defeat. I want to help you, and I push back when I have to, but I want you to be successful. When I first got asked over to the White House, he says, you know, I don't have your phone number, and I said, there's a reason for that. Sort of the highlight of my campaign. He said, I'm sorry about it. I said, no, that's sort of the most noted I got was my phone number. But we found some common ground. I've come to like President, and he likes himself, so we've got a lot in common already. So far, so good. A lot of noise, and it can be ugly at times, but the 30,000-foot view thing is pretty good if you're a Republican. And I want to talk a bit about Kavanaugh, because I don't want people to think this is just about Trump, because it's not. Now, Brett Kavanaugh, anybody know Brett? Yeah, I mean, okay, I've known him for 20 years, right? What you see is what you get. He worked in the Bush administration. He was Bush's private secretary when he was president. Nothing came across President Bush's desk that he didn't see. He was very closely involved in 9/11 in the White House on that day. And so Brett is about as good as it gets on our side. You know, he is one of the great conservative minds of his generation. Do you agree he would be on any Republican's list if they were president? No outlier here. And I told the Democrats, this is a good day. You know, it could have been Judge Judy. It's Brett Kavanaugh. So, so let's celebrate this. And so I've known him for a long time. I can tell you it's about as mainstream as you ever get on our side. And he was the Bush guy. So President Trump had a list of people he identified that he would choose from, which was unusual, and he won. So he's not doing anything exotic here. And on that list are a lot of good names, and I'm sure many of you know those folks. But Brett and Neil Gorsuch were two of the greatest picks any Republican could have made. Now, so I vote for Sotomayor and Kagan, get the crap beat out of me at home, but that's okay. I thought that's the way it should be. I'm trying to do it the way it used to be. Senator Thurman voted for...
Student is going to chair this. He is a member of the Board of Governors of the RNLA. He is the leader of Clark Hill's global political law practice, and I know him as the GC of the Republican Attorneys General Association. And I've told Charlie to leave time for Q&A, which I'll try to do in the next panel as well.
Thank you, Professor. And he was actually one of my professors at Georgetown Law, so it's an honor to follow him. It's also an honor to introduce Attorney General Moody, who I believe has been focused on Florida, and this is her first appearance in D.C., so it's great to have her. The Attorney General is a fifth-generation Floridian who earned both a bachelor's and law degree from the University of Florida, and I have far too much class to mention that my Michigan Wolverines beat them in the NCAA tournament. And after her degrees from Florida, she also attended Stetson University and got her Master's of Law in International Law. She started her career practicing commercial litigation at a prominent Florida firm, and then joined the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuting drug, firearm, and fraud offenses. And then, to make anybody feel insecure, at age of 31, she became the youngest judge in Florida when she was elected a circuit court judge in Hillsborough County. Then this year, I know a lot of people in this room were in Florida helping out with elections, and there were close elections. Obviously, Rick Scott won by about 10,000 votes, and Ron DeSantis by about 35,000 votes. She didn't need your help. She won by a landslide of about 500,000 votes. So incredibly impressive in terms of connecting with the voters and a great background. Since taking office on January 8th, so in a few short months, she's already been recognized as a national leader, appointed to the Executive Committee of the National Association of Attorneys General, and also very active with the Republican Attorneys General Association and the Rule of Law Defense Fund, which she's on the board of. General Moody's also chairing the Florida Statewide Council on Human Trafficking, and was, in the past couple of weeks, appointed by Governor DeSantis as the point person on the Florida Statewide Task Force on Opioid Abuse. Her husband is also in law enforcement, so they're a great family, and we're honored to have her, so thank you for being here, General.
Well, this is a very unique opportunity. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to join you today. Every time I come to Washington, I am still in awe of its size and grandeur. I grew up in a small rural town, Plant City, Florida. So as you can imagine, coming to Washington is a big deal for me. It reminds me also of another Republican AG, a former Republican AG, who will remain nameless because he would be very upset if he knew I was telling this story. But every time he comes here and gets into a car, he always asks the person driving when he passes by the White House, "Hey, what's that big white house right there?" And he says he loves hearing how people describe it. First they get all flustered like he didn't know that was the White House, and then he likes to hear how people describe it. So I always think that one now when I'm passing by the White House, and it's unique to hear other people describe just the grandeur of this city and all that I still feel when I'm here. It's nice to hear what people that live here think about it. It was really interesting to me that I got to come and share my thoughts on deregulation. I think Florida is a shining example of how we should structure regulating. When I was campaigning, I heard from business owners and people that were often frustrated with agency decisions or rules, how they were trying to comply, and it was so difficult. Sometimes they would have to comply with regulations in the state and then the same thing federally, and they were having problems figuring out which ones they needed to do, if both. And it's funny, coming into this role, I actually serve from both sides of that equation. As the head of the Department of Legal Affairs, I am a member of the Florida Cabinet. I sit as a cabinet member and the head of several Florida state agencies who report to the governor, myself, and 2 other cabinet members. And so, in some respects, I have become a regulator. But like many other state attorney generals, my office also represents the people of Florida in lawsuits against the federal government. And often those lawsuits involve attempts by federal agencies to overstep their authority and then intrude on state sovereignty. So we are regularly asked to join with other states in commenting on proposed federal agency rules. And so to that end, I am also a deregulator. But from whichever vantage point, I always begin from the following premise, that the founders created a limited government with checks and balances to restrain the exercise of governmental power. And they knew that the absence of law is not chaos, it is freedom. Freedom to innovate, create, experiment, improve, freedom to express ideas and to exercise one's faith. The founders had seen how a monarch's exercise of absolute power, unaccountable to the governed, created an unjust society. They had also seen both the tyranny of unchecked legislative power and the dysfunction of unanimity required by the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution's genius is its divided power. Divided power among those governing ensures greater strength of those governed. To restrain government, the founders devised the brilliant plan of a bicameral legislature, executive veto, and a separate limited judicial function. And I believe, like many of you in this room, this resulted in the greatest nation the world has ever known. Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited here early, who often wrote about democracy in America, and whom Justice Scalia once called a perceptive Frenchman, he said this about lawyers. And I love this because it reminds me of myself. Lawyers who have made a special study of the laws derive from this occupation certain habits of order, which, before I continue, as I have moved from practicing law and then moving on to the bench, I developed these tendencies to make sure I could maintain order at all times, as chaos would often erupt in courts. And I know none of you do this, but as lawyers would interrupt other lawyers in the middle of the argument because they thought they had something very important to say during the middle of this argument. So I developed this habit, a bad habit, of as this person was making argument and this one was jumping up out of order, I would just use my hand and go like this and point over here. And if they kept doing it, I'd just keep doing this. And I find now that I'm in the Attorney General's office when I meet around with my chief deputies and my top staff, if one jumps up, I'm doing this. It's not good. It's not good. But old habits are hard to break, but I'm trying. It's a unique thing to move from the judiciary into practicing law again. I keep wanting people to pretend to agree with me, and they just want to yell at me because I'm a Republican sometimes when I'm out. But let me start again. Lawyers who have made a special study of the laws derive from this occupation certain habits of order, a taste for formalities, and a kind of instinctive regard for the regular connection of ideas, which naturally render them very hostile to the revolutionary spirit and the unreflecting passions of the multitude. Do you find that you are hostile towards the unreflecting passions of democratic socialism? And as much as we want a clean environment, maybe the Green New Deal? Lawyers, through their skills with the law and language, can help bring order from chaos. And true, we have a taste for formalities, and I believe that leads us to feeling comfortable with more words, more structure. Sometimes that leads to more regulations. We get uncomfortable if there are too few words. People might think something that we don't mean them to think. I get even frustrated with the use of the term general when people call me general. It actually doesn't mean what people think it means. I have absolutely no authority to control our military. It does refer to the type of attorney I am. And as my son, we just got back from family weekend at Fort Benning, and I saw what people have sacrificed in true selfless service for our nation. I'm very humbled when people call me general. So we get unnerved when people use the wrong word at times. But with words, we can resolve disputes with finality. They can transform ideas into law, which govern our affairs, avoid disputes, and make society just. But we have to be careful that we not burden society with too many words, that our taste for formality not constrain freedom. During the past 20 years, each Congress has enacted an average of over 6,900 pages of law. The United States Code is approximately 356 volumes and takes up over 55 feet of shelf space. The Code of Federal Regulations is over 180,000 pages. The second edition of the Federal Reporter spanned 999 volumes in 69 years, from 1924 to 1993. But from the short time since 1993 and today, Federal courts of appeal have filled 910 volumes in just 26 years. This growth of law is like legal kudzu, growing at a rapid pace, stifling freedom and innovation. Enacting new laws is not the answer to every problem. Government leaders need to get out of our pruning shears and get to work reducing the number of needless laws and regulations. We can't succumb to the notion that if we start doing something even a little bit, it's just going to grow back. Doing something is better than nothing, and I believe that incremental improvements will add up. When it comes to the role of the administrative state, Florida is on to something. A lot of my colleagues are here from Florida, and I think that they would agree. Our legislature only meets 60 days a year and is required to pass a balanced budget. In fact, they're in session right now until May. Florida has a provision in our Constitution mandating separation of powers. We have a robust non-delegation doctrine. The legislature is not permitted to delegate lawmaking authority to an agency. An article in the spring 2017 version of the Missouri Law Review compared and contrasted Florida and federal law on non-delegation. And the author concluded Florida's approach is far superior to the approach by federal law. Florida has other structural limitations to restrain the administrative state. Under Florida law, agencies are not permitted to adopt rules unless there is a specific grant of legislative authority directing them to do so. Any substantially affected person can sue an agency to repeal a rule that exceeds an agency's rulemaking authority. An agency can be sued for relying on a policy that is not adopted by notice and comment rulemaking. And agencies must consider a cost-benefit analysis in adopting rules. We have a clearinghouse for new rules, making sure they are consistent, and legislation must be limited to a single subject. So must agency rules. Thanks to 20 years of Republican governors, we have been through multiple rounds of deregulations where agencies have been encouraged to re-examine their rules, getting rid of obsolete rules. Our new governor, Ron DeSantis, immediately upon taking office, held a deregathon, where all agency heads were instructed to report, begin deliberating and examining their rules, and determining which ones that we could eliminate. And last fall, Florida voters adopted a constitutional amendment forbidding courts and administrative hearing officers from affording deference to agency interpretations of statutes or rules. And all of this is working. People and businesses are voting with their feet, and they are coming to Florida. Florida's economy is growing. Businesses are relocating to Florida. Families are moving to Florida from high-tax, high-regulation states. Nationally, Florida ranks number 4 in state fiscal health. I support our president's regulatory agenda, which aims to do many of the things that we are already doing in Florida. Eliminating needless rules, reining in agency rulemaking, prohibiting reliance on unadopted rules by guidance, and ending rulemaking by lawsuit consent decrees. But the president can't do it alone. If we are really going to scale back agency rulemaking, Congress has to start solving problems. And it is no accident that the founders placed Congress in Article 1. As the most representative body, the founders intended Congress to be the primary policy engine of federal government. But today, it is sadly in stalemate most of the time. Because of its dysfunction, non-elected bureaucrats and non-elected judges are creating policy. That is dangerous, and that must stop. It shifts the power to those governing and takes it away from those governed. We must demand that our Congress do its job. It's gotten so bad we have Congress members that talk about how bad Congress is. It's like when talk show hosts interview talk show hosts, that's one of my pet peeves. Congress complains about Congress is another one of my pet peeves. As conservatives, we know that less government in our lives leads to freer, more prosperous America. Less government in our lives creates jobs, wealth, and ideas. Less government and branches staying within their lane of power restores the more perfect union our founders envisioned. If you are here today, I suspect that you already believe this as I do. We as lawyers know that in order to ensure the continuity and strength of this American spirit, we must constantly reassess whether we are remaining true to our founders' intent, and we have a responsibility to speak up when we are not, to remind those with unreflecting passions why disregarding the structured security of limited powers will weaken us as a nation. And just as we need less words and regulations, we must present these concepts powerfully, with less legalese or lawyer speak. Less is more. We must say this is dangerous, and this is why. President Trump's got this right. Build a wall. Make America great again. Sure, there are numerous issues that we must debate to get to how to do this, but we've got to get people behind us and our vision, and we do that by putting it simply. Congress, do your job. Get to work. Just do it. All things we can get behind. I don't like a lot about Twitter, but I do like the fact it forces us to speak with brevity. Unelected people creating law is dangerous. Simple. Historically, this causes unrest in nations and feeds hostility of citizens towards government. And when the Constitution was drafted and the structure of our nation was being created, Madison said, "We are forever deciding the fate of our Republican government." And that is true. And now that fate is in our hands. I appreciate you inviting me here today to be with you. This is quite an honor. It's the first time I have addressed this group, so I feel like I'm now initiated. I hope that you will give me the privilege of joining you again in the future. I'm only 3 months into office right now. By the next time I come back and talk to you, I'll have a lot to say. So thank you again. I hope we'll have some time to talk, and appreciate it. I hope to see you again soon. So now we're going to have a casual conversation.
Perfect. And I've spent the last few days asking people what they wanted to hear you talk about. And the questions fell into sort of two buckets. And the first one was sort of on the political, not political, but personal advice side, to the extent that you have a very unique background, having been a prosecutor, a judge, and now an executive also running law enforcement. How have the different background pieces helped you as you've taken office? And for a room full of practicing attorneys, what advice do you have for them when interacting both with judges and then the state attorneys general?
Well, I'll start with the latter. My advice for attorneys when interacting with judges is exactly what I just said: less is more. But I'll begin with my background. I never thought that I would run to be the Attorney General. It was not something that when I left law school I envisioned for myself, 20 years later. I thought I was going to be a partner in the civil law firm I joined, Holland & Knight, and doing civil litigation until I retired. I don't even know that I paid attention to criminal law in law school. But I think over the course of events in anyone's life, as you experience things, you become more passionate about certain things, and it carves out a path for the direction of your life. And so I ended up, when I was a civil litigator initially, I ended up in federal court one day and saw a federal prosecutor in action and watched him stand up and said, "I represent the United States of America." And I have to say, even to this day, and I know I've just been elected as the top prosecutor and lawyer in the state of Florida, but the proudest moment of my professional career was the first time I stood up and said, "My name is Ashley Moody and I represent the United States of America." It was a very powerful moment. To this day, the fact that I had that job means so much to me because I love this country. And then becoming the Attorney General was just a natural progression to use my experience. The reason I resigned from the bench, and most people think I was crazy for giving up a job as a judge to go into partisan politics, which, let's face it, has become a political blood sport. I would very much wanted to be proactive. As a judge, you are reactive. You see circumstances that come before you on a daily basis that really represent the societal ills, whether that be drug addiction, the opioid epidemic, crime, family dysfunction, juvenile issues. You really see it all. And you become attached to wanting to make things better. You are reactive as a judge. You can be proactive in the executive branch to some extent. And so that was what drove me. After 10 years on the bench, it was a big jump, but I was excited to do it. Having been in a judgeship where I did both appellate work and trial work, it was a natural fit into the Florida State Attorney General's office because we handle all of the state appeals. We do all the civil litigation on behalf of agencies, on behalf of our laws. We defend the laws of the state. We handle statewide prosecution, consumer protection, Medicaid fraud. The job is very broad, and so that breadth of experience has been very helpful.
Makes sense. And then the second sort of batch of questions I got fell into the fact that not most, but many of the people in this room, if not most, have over the years gone to Florida to help out with election day operations or recounts. Now, by the way, if this were like North Dakota or Alaska, I don't know there'd be quite the participation rate.
For some reason, the Disney area gets lots of volunteers.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Miami, people are usually willing to go to, but for good or for bad, people have, over the years, ended up in Florida. Now, this year, as I mentioned, you won by a landslide, so you didn't have the same problems that we saw in Palm Beach and Broward. Didn't impact you. You won by enough. But now, and you, of course, weren't Attorney General at the time, so had no authority over those elections in November. But going forward, what should we all know about election administration going into 2020, and what, if any, activity your office has?
Well, I'll start off by saying Governor DeSantis is doing an amazing job as the governor of Florida. And in case, I know many of you are from Florida, so you're getting a front seat, but he is an amazing person. I've gotten to know him very well over the last year, and then now we sit together on Florida's cabinet. He's a smart person. He's a Harvard Law graduate. He cares deeply about the state and works as hard as I've ever seen anyone work. And he is committed to making sure that Florida is not dominating the news during the next election cycle, except for good things, except for winning. We would love to dominate the news in that regard. But he has removed elected individuals that he believed were not handling the elections in the manner that he would expect. He has used that authority as governor to do that.
And
it was a bold step, and he does not tolerate incompetence. And so he expects, if you're going to offer yourself up to service to the citizens of the state of Florida, you better do it in an exemplary manner. And if he sees malfeasance or he sees negligence of duty, he's going to take action. And he's done that in numerous instances already as governor. He'll take the heat if it will make Florida be a better performing state in any of the areas, any of the agencies or in the supervisors of elections offices. He will do it. He has also put in office as Secretary of State a judge. A very bright judge, Laurel Lee, is our new Secretary of State. And I just thought that was a dynamic decision. She's smart, she has integrity, attention to detail, and she's used to maintaining order. And, and also she's used to performing in a nonpartisan job. A lot of, I believe that trust in our agencies and the way they function, especially our voting, there has to be a trust that it is fair and that the process is followed. And her experience as a judge in that nonpartisan role, I just think brings a great trust to that position, and it's just so important. I'm a big believer that within our judicial system, and I believe this the same way in terms of our election system, not only must it be fair, it must also be perceived as fair. Both are equally important, and both are what gives strength to the underlying stability of both our judicial system and our election system, and she brings that to that job. So Governor DeSantis is doing an amazing job, and certainly We are still involved in some litigation. Now, some of it is over and has been dismissed. There was some litigation involving, there was litigation wanting voting by mail if it was postmarked prior to the date of election. If it came in after election, the plaintiff still wanted it to be counted, which, as you can imagine, changing rules like that in the middle of the game presents some problems. That was denied, and that is no longer ongoing. But we are still involved in signature mismatch issues, and we are hoping we are still litigating that. We are through the temporary restraining order preliminary injunction phase, and now we would move into arguing the constitutionality of the statute. But we'll still move on that, so hopefully that's in place by our next election.
So Mark Elias and the Democrats have made a lot of money litigating and created a lot of work for you in Florida too, it sounds like.
Lots of work in Florida.
So on a very substantive piece, and I've seen this working with the AGs for the past few years, the top priority in many states is dealing with the opioid epidemic. And I know President Trump's been great about trying to take a leadership role also. This may not be fair because I think it's in the last week or two that you were just appointed.
Monday,
sorry. You were just appointed to lead Florida's effort in fighting the epidemic. What can be done, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not a new issue to me. So, it takes an impetus to get you from a judge position into the world of partisan politics, I said. And one of those reasons is you see what's going on a daily basis. I had families in the courtroom not knowing what to do with people that were there addicted to controlled substances. I saw it demolish families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and we're actually in Florida, the age that's hit the most is our working age population. We lose now more people in Florida to car accidents and gun violence than we lose less to car accidents and gun violence than we do to opioid overdose. Deaths. We lose 17 people a day. When I started campaigning, we were losing 14 people a day. And I said, this needs to stop. We don't have a coordinated statewide approach. We're trying things in one county that are working, and in other counties it's not working. We need to have a concerted effort, data back, so that when we get resources in, we're putting them into our counties consistently in a way we know that we'll see a return on that death rate. And I campaigned on this. It was one of my main priorities. Certainly as the wife of a DEA agent and a former federal drug prosecutor, this is of utmost importance to me and dominates most of our dinner conversations. So I believe when Governor DeSantis saw on day one in office, I put together an expert of people across the state of Florida to start giving us advice. And this is from counties that reduced their death toll by 40%. It was from service providers that were making inroads. We asked for the legislature to create a task force to give me the authority to go forward and, as monies came in, be able to recommend where they go in a coordinated way. President Trump declared this an emergency, got money for the state of Florida. Our governor declared it an emergency, and we have money, but we didn't have that coordinated effort. So on Monday, Governor DeSantis, and let me just, again, I'm going to go back to the type of governor this is. That working group that I instituted on day one made a recommendation that we needed to either institute a new Office of Drug Control policy or we needed a statewide task force. Governor DeSantis came in, did an executive order, and did both. So it is a lot to say I am now charging ahead as the chair of the statewide group challenged with solving the opioid crisis. There was a cartoon that came out a few days ago that had this huge pile of drugs up next to the Capitol, and it just had me in a prescription pill bottle, and I thought, that's not pressure. But I am up to the task. I'm excited that he trusted me with it, and we're going to get started as soon as possible.
Sounds great. The professor was just signaling me that we're out of time.
That's what they do.
So I've got more questions. I hope you'll come back next year and I can get to more of them and we can get more from folks. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
was told to keep the trains on time. I'm sorry I had to rush Ashley away. The next plenary session is quite different. Elliot Burke, who is our former president and is managing partner of Burke and Farah, is going to introduce an old friend of mine, actually, a longtime friend, Ken Starr, and he will explain.
Well, good morning. As Professor Wallace said, my name is Elliot Burke. I'm the past president of the RNLA. They evidently can't get rid of me. But I have the great honor today to introduce someone who is no stranger to this crowd and indeed no stranger to the pantheon of legal legends. So how does one introduce such a man? Well, we could spend our time here talking about how he clerked for Chief Justice Warren Burger. We could talk about how he served as counselor to U.S. Attorney General William French Smith, or how he served as a United States Circuit Court judge for the District of Columbia, only to resign to serve as Solicitor General of the United States under President George H.W. Bush. Or we could turn to his decades of private practice, working on some of the most important cases of our time. Or perhaps talk about his time in the academy, teaching constitutional law at NYU and George Mason, and serving as Dean of Pepperdine Law School, and then as President and Chancellor of Baylor University. Now, he'd probably want to talk about his life as husband, Alice, who we are grateful is here today with him, father to Randy, Carolyn, and Cynthia, and his 7 grandkids. And then, of course, there was the time he served as independent counsel for the now a bit distant troubles regarding a mischievous savings and loan in a failed land deal in Arkansas, among other things, which is really why he's here today as an author of Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation, a book that has been described as a firecracker of a book that tells the ultimate inside story, candid, illuminating, and authoritative. But before we turn to that, I'd like to just say a few words about what Ken Starr means to me personally. I can safely say that I would not be where I am today professionally were not for this man. He hired me in the independent counsel's office when I was just 2 years out of law school. I think I was the second to last lawyer he hired there, and really laid the path for my career in political law. But I can also safely say I would not be where I am today personally were it not for this man. 2 months after he hired me, he hired a recent college grad straight out of Maine as his assistant, who just happened to become my wife. So I owe a lot to this guy. And I take a lot of pride that our son, Colin Winston, just happens to share a middle name with him. So please join me in welcoming our 2004 Ed Meese RNLA recipient, Judge Kenneth Winston Starr.
That was great. Wonderful. Did she ever go to law school? Well, she had
Well, thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. That was your 7th inning stretch. So thank you, Elliot. And those were the days. No, they weren't. They were just absolutely miserable, but we had great people. And Elliot, superb lawyer who's gone on to do great things each and every year and every day. So, Elliot, thank you for your friendship, for your beautiful family. My middle name comes from the great man. So generation after generation, I was born in 1946, which does make me a baby boomer. And my late parents in the great state of Texas were great admirers of the great man, Mr. Churchill. So I'm glad that the name continues. There's a story, speaking of Churchill, about a British prime minister from the prior century to the great man, Benjamin Disraeli. We all recognize the name. And like Churchill, Disraeli was a master of the king or queen's language. And on one particular social occasion, people have been chatting over, and they come over to the prime minister. As an author, he kept writing books even as prime minister, as did Churchill. And they said, "Oh, Prime Minister," and I won't try to do that and subject you to it, but just imagine that speaking not with an American accent. Remember, we're the ones who speak with an accent. So they go to, "Oh, Prime Minister, we were just chatting. Do you think there's a distinction to be drawn between a tragedy on the one hand, You think of Shakespeare, and a disaster on the other. He says, oh yes, immediately. Imagine now his political nemesis was William Gladstone. You historians all know that. So immediately, with that great mind and quick wit, Disraeli says, oh yes, yes, yes. Imagine, if you will, that Mr. Gladstone is out on a very pleasant afternoon, out on the Thames, and he tumbles overboard. Now that would be a tragedy. Imagine further that people jump in and save him. Now that would be a disaster. Well, investigating the President of the United States partakes of both. There's a certain tragic element to it in the first instance. If we're patriots, and everyone in this room is, whether we agree with the president's policies or not, we really wish the president well, even if we want the president not to be reelected, right? But we don't wish tragedies and disasters on him, her, or the country. Investigating the president is a sure recipe for achieving a Disraeli-esque tragedy and disaster. Let's march down memory lane ever so quickly. The scene, the Oval Office, Ulysses S. Grant, read Ron Chernow's book, Chapter 37, is advised of this brewing scandal called the Whiskey Ring. As we all know from history, General Grant was very honest, but he had some not so honest people around him. And so he said, well, we have to do something. And he made a presidential decision. It was not an attorney general decision. He made a presidential decision. We're going to appoint a special counsel to investigate us. The Whiskey Ring, born in St. Louis, you know, there was no income tax in those days. Can you imagine? Think about it. Moved to Texas. Oh, I see hands going up. There is a trend underway, especially from California. But in any event, I digress. So a special counsel is, and so Grant, being politically aware, if not indeed astute, says, well, we cannot have someone who's identified of the party of Lincoln, the grand old party, the party that rose up righteously against slavery, and then the party that saved the Union. We can't have us investigating ourselves. So let's go to the other party, the party of Thomas Jefferson, and let's name someone from that party to do the investigation. And so it was a former United States Senator of the other party from Missouri, so he would sort of know the crowd and really be able to jump right into it. He was fired 6 months later. Why? Overly aggressive investigation. Let's jump all the way. I was going to talk about Teapot Dome. Invite me back next year. Let's move on to the Truman administration. Scandal affecting the Treasury Department. Truman's Attorney General steps in and takes on the role that General Grant had taken from the Oval Office and says, we need a special counsel to investigate these serious allegations. And so he appoints a special assistant United States attorney. It had some long title, well, not special counsel, but that was the function. So this person of the other party begins his work, and 67 days into his work, he's fired by the Attorney General. Why? Overly aggressive tactics in investigating the people around the President of the United States. This was April of 1952, an election year, and though Give 'em Hell Harry was not on the ballot, nonetheless, he was a good party man, and he wanted the nominee, destined to be Adlai Stevenson, to win and to succeed him, right? So he said, we've got to do something about this. Congress was in an uproar. The special counsel has been fired. I've got it. Let's fire the Attorney General. And he did. Fired the Attorney General, and the scandal ran its course. We move forward quickly now to Watergate. We don't even need to be reminded of what happened. The Saturday Night Massacre. In his early months, Archibald Cox is to be fired. And what was the reason for the firing? Overly aggressive tactics by a partisan staff. There are echoes, aren't there, that one can hear if one pauses to listen. Now, actually, I have made a bit of an amateur historian study of that which led up to Watergate. And frankly, I think President Nixon had a point. He actually did have an argument as to the unreasonableness of Mr. Cox. But there was arguments on the other side. Welcome to our world called the law. Well, because Mr. Cox did not accept the proposed compromise in terms of reviewing the White House tapes that would be done by a United States senator from the other party, right? So not from President Nixon's party, the party of Jefferson, that was rejected. We've got to see the tapes fully. Sound familiar? Echoes come back to be heard down the corridors of time. Now, something happened that we all know, the Saturday Night Massacre. It actually started on Saturday afternoon, but it extended into the evening. And history tells us that it was actually a beautiful day here in Washington. None of you is old enough to remember that day, but October, and the order is given, and Elliot Richardson, and we're going to have audience participation here, said in response, what? Hey, now come on. No, well, I don't mean, this is a legal crowd, so they're textualists, and therefore they want to get it exactly right. In general, without purporting to quote Attorney General Richardson, what did he say? No. Thank you. What is it about no you don't understand? And of course, but guess what? He recognized the power of the President of the United States under our separation of powers to fire the Attorney General or to fire the special prosecutor. And so he did the honorable thing. By the way, does that principle sound familiar to you? Does that sound like obstruction of justice? But I digress. And so Elliot Richardson said, I can't do it. The second in command was the Deputy Attorney General, who by operation of law becomes the Acting Attorney General. We named that deputy, trivial pursuit, but this is not trivial. Who was that Deputy Attorney General? Oh, this is, Elliot, Don, this is a beautifully informed, historically literate audience. Bill Ruckelshaus. He too said, as a matter of honor, I cannot do this in light of the representations I've made to the Senate Judiciary Committee to protect the independence of Archibald Cox. Now, there was a third person. This is before the creation of the Office of Associate Attorney General, which stands to this day. It's perfectly fine that we had that growth in the Leviathan. The Justice Department was a bit lean, frankly, at the top, historically, and I really do mean that. You do need senior leadership. The Associate Attorney General was created, but not then. That came during the Carter administration. So let's reverse field and return then to that dark day, and who was third in command at the Justice Department, and who became the Acting Attorney General? Oh, boy, great. Future judge, future Supreme Court nominee, Robert Bork. And happily, I'll give a little bit of personal testimony here. I discussed this with the great man, Bob Bork, during his lifetime when we served. I was privileged, unworthy as I was, to serve as his colleague on the D.C. Circuit. And Bob wasn't one to march down memory lane, but he would on prompting. And the story has been told through the eyes and recollection of really only Bill Ruckelshaus. Maybe if you know, no, Elliot Richardson wrote about this, and I'd love to be guided to it. But anyway, here is a first-hand report. Perhaps I have a failing memory, but I don't think so on this. I did not want, Bob Bork, I did not want to fire the independent counsel, or the special prosecutor, as he was called. But we sat in, many of you been in that back room on the 5th floor The Attorney General is not the big conference room. Many of you have had meetings here. But behind the conference room is a rather small, surprisingly small office. And there, the three of them discussed it. And Bork, I don't want to say relented, that would be overstating it, but accepted the fact that it was the right thing to do in light of the president's power. It was an unwise use of power, as he saw it, to fire the independent counsel, as he would be called in the fullness of time. Needless to say, the country was inflamed, and that was the beginning of the end, as it turned out. Not so much nationally, but here in Washington. Sometimes the nation actually follows Washington. And that was one of those instances where people of both parties were pretty upset about the firing. Even though there was a rich tradition of firing the independent counsel or special prosecutor or whatever. Why not? Look, Ulysses S. Grant did it, and what was good enough for honest Ulysses should be good enough for contemporary times. But no, because of what? It was tugging at the idea of honest and accountable government. How dare you, Mr. President, order the firing of the special prosecutor? Congress then responds during the Carter administration with the Ethics in Government Act that created now a special prosecutor that 5 years later was called the independent counsel and now would be called the special counsel. What that step represented was a radical shift from our traditions of separation of powers, from the president or the attorney general appointing a special counsel and investing that power or vesting that power in a three-judge panel of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. 3 appellate judges from around the country chaired by a member of the D.C. Circuit, but judges appointed from around the country. A panel of 3 who simply served as an extra judicial duty on rotating terms appointed by the Chief Justice. So that was the mechanism for 21 years into which a number of people were appointed, including Judge Lawrence Walsh and Iran-Contra. As a result of Iran-Contra, you're investigating a good and honorable man. His name is Ronald Reagan. We, on one side of the aisle, now hate you, and we hate this statute. Then came Whitewater. Elliot, thank you for being willing to serve. We felt somewhat, I'm from San Antonio, somewhat besieged at times, but I don't want to be overly dramatic. But Elliot came when we needed Elliot to serve, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And then, of course, the most controversial phase, even after we'd had 14 convictions in Arkansas, including the sitting governor of the state, we'd found an enormous amount of corruption in the state. It was straight out of Madison's Federalist 10. You could predict it. If you read Madison's Federalist 10, you would say, there's probably stuff here that needs to be investigated and prosecuted. And sure enough, it was, including the president and the then First Lady's business partners and the First Lady's client from the Rose Law Firm. I tell that tale in the book. But that's not the purpose of what I want to do here. By the end of that independent counsel investigation, including the impeachment of the President of the United States, supported by 31 Democrats in the House of Representatives, the people in Mr. Jefferson's party had had it with the statute. They who had vigorously defended reauthorizing the statute said, we need a new way. And Janet Reno, President Clinton's Attorney General in 1999, got a team of very able lawyers. One of the very able lawyers was Neil Katyal, destined to become acting Solicitor General in the Obama administration. And this team looked at what had happened over the course of history, including, of course, the controversial history of the independent counsel law, the Walsh investigation, Iran-Contra, and your humble correspondence investigation as well. And they chartered a new course through regulations that have been on the books for 20 years and under which Bob Mueller was appointed. So there was a restoration The walls were rebuilt, separation of powers honored anew. That is, it's a call by the President or the Attorney General under the regulations to determine under what circumstances a special counsel, special prosecutor should be named. The final thing I want to say before we move, I hope, to a spirited question and answer period is mindful of the country's reaction to a report, a referral to the House of Representatives on the matter of the President's perjury and obstruction of justice. By the way, I have to say, the name of the book is Contempt, because President Clinton, and this is part of the tragedy, is the only president in the history of the United States to have been held in contempt, and the basis of the holding of him in contempt was not perjury, it was obstruction of justice. Reread, if you haven't read it, read Chief Judge Susan Weber Wright's unappealed judgment of contempt visited on the former president. Now, back to these regulations. They're still in effect, but I think they've been somewhat underread. Mindful of the recent searing experience, and history is a great teacher, Holmes, the great Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., had some very bad ideas, especially on eugenics, but he was an extraordinary person with an extraordinary mind. And in his magisterial study of the law, you all know this statement, the very first paragraph of the common law, which he wrote amazingly, capturing essentially the essence of the entire body of common law. The common law. The life of the law has been experienced, thank you, Professor and dear Don Wallace, not logic. It's not that the law should be illogical. To the contrary, it should be coherent, it should be well-reasoned, systematically put together in a way that makes sense, that tort liability here needs to have some resonance with contract liability over here, civil procedure and so forth. But then the experience under the special prosecutor provisions of the independent counsel caused, and I wish we knew more about what went on in those internal deliberations. We're no longer going to have reports to Congress. The special counsel is not to report to Congress at all. By the way, before I delve into the regulations ever so briefly, regulations have the force of, these are not admonitions. These are not guidelines. These are regulations that bind the Attorney General of the United States until they are rescinded. Bill Barr, our very able Attorney General, is bound to follow these regulations. So under the regulations, the special counsel is to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report summarizing the special counsel's work. What is the Attorney General's obligation under the very next set of the regulations? The Attorney General is not to send the report to Congress. The Attorney General is to notify Congress and to provide an explanation in certain subcategories of what the special counsel has done. As I see it, and I've had no conversations, direct or indirect, with the Attorney General, I'm looking from the outside, what I'm seeing is, thus far, the Attorney General following the letter of the regulations. And so when there are calls for, we want full disclosure and we want it fully now, we hear then voices saying, let's listen to the law, not just to the world of politics, and the culture favors transparency. Bill Barr said in his confirmation hearings, and he's now said this in letters to the Congress, to the House, that he favors transparency to the fullest extent, I'm paraphrasing, that is permitted under law, under regulations, and so forth. Now, you don't have to practice criminal law. You don't ever have to deal with a grand jury as lawyers to know that what? Grand jury secrecy is sacrosanct. In an age of transparency, Congress hasn't changed the law with respect to grand jury secrecy. It could. It said, we live in a new age. We live in the age of the internet. Let's have that grand jury testimony simply produced by a court reporter, and let's have it out on the internet, just as we did with a certain report in 1998. Let's don't even look at it, which is what happened in 1998. Let's don't review it for privacy concerns. Let's don't review it with respect to other kinds of issues and concerns, the dignity of the presidency. Let's just put it out there. Is this sounding somewhat familiar? For Bill Barr to do that would be, and I think this is being recognized certainly in the legal community, but law is sometimes swamped by politics, would be a pretty flagrant violation of the criminal laws with potential criminal penalties. As I see it, the Attorney General is following the law. Now, that having been said, the Attorney General enjoys, as a matter of executive power, discretion. So, as I see it, he has the discretion to share, consistent with law, more than he's required to do under the regulations. But isn't it intriguing that these regulations, I want to just reiterate this, and I think it's important in your own conversations with folks who would just say, well, why don't we just release the report? Because we have, hopefully always in this country, the rule of law, not the rule of passion. And that includes the rule of, or the goal of transparency. Those regulations, I want to reiterate this, have been in effect for 20 years. This is not novel. They were in effect throughout President Obama's administration, throughout President George W. Bush's administration. Was there, and I think the answer is no, some of us here probably knows, was there an oversight hearing by the House Judiciary Committee or any committee with respect to, excuse me, we're the Committee of Transparency and we're the country of transparency. Let's have a hearing. What is this curbing and cutting back, and that all you are obligated to do, Mr. Attorney General, is to provide us with a notification and then an explanation of what has been done. So I leave you with this. Law counts, even in the swirl of politics. In fact, one of the jobs of the Attorney General, and it's a hard job, and I will close with this, is to tell the President of the United States, whoever the President is, no, Mr. President, you cannot do that. You can't do that. You can go to Congress or whatever, but within the ambit, and it's a broad ambit of the powers that you enjoy by virtue of having the executive power of the United States under Article 2 of the Constitution vested in you, but still in all, you are under the law. This was established, and let us give thanks for it. And if you're a person of faith, we should prayerfully give thanks that John at Runnymede, His Majesty, had to accede to the proposition. And in those more, shall I say, homogeneous days of culture, at Runnymede, John was willing to say, I, John, am a Christian king and I'm under God. But he was not willing to say, I'm under the law of the realm, political power of the barons on that beautiful meadow near Windsor Castle, on the banks of the Thames River. He acceded to the proposition that even the king is under the law. We have no king. As a matter of constitutional law, we can never have a king. But we do have a chief executive who is under the law. What do we do to assure that? Checks and balances, yes. Holding presidents to account, So let's have tragedies and disasters in the form of special counsels and independent counsels and special prosecutors. But what it ultimately boils down to is the integrity, ultimately of the president himself, but also the integrity of those who serve in the Justice Department. Because at the root of Watergate was a Justice Department that allowed itself at the highest levels to be compromised. And I am going to now offer, in closing, a benedictory prediction. Bill Barr will not be compromised. I love the way he put it in his confirmation hearing. I will not be bullied. You know, the White House, Teddy Roosevelt said, it's a bully. Everything is bully. That's a good word. But being bullied is not. And as he's looking at the senators on both sides of the aisle, he said, Bill Barr, as the nominee said, I will not be bullied by anyone. So God bless the Justice Department, the Elliot Richardsons and the Bill Ruckelshauses and the Bob Borks, and now the Bill Barrs of the world. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
We'll do a few questions. Time for about 3 or 4 questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What's that? Sure. Okay.
Thank you. You're very kind, very generous. Yeah.
We have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions.
Elliot,
I'm
would
sure
you
there are gonna
mind
be plenty.
recognizing the questioner?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Paul Kamenar and Ken, I read your book. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Paul.
You were quite right in terms of describing the regulations in terms of the By the way, I'm the one that sued Mueller on the constitutionality of his office, and we're petitioning for a rehearing in the D.C. Circuit. But on the report, you're quite right that there's 2 reports. Mueller's is confidential to the Attorney General. The Attorney General is a brief notification, but just to put a finer point, all he has to do under the regulations is simply notify Congress that Mueller is done, and only note if there's been any veto of Mueller's prosecution by Rosenstein. So it's even briefer than what Barr already submitted. So he's going over and above his duty. But just one more query. The only other time before this appointment, special counsel, was Janet Reno appointing Senator Danforth for the Racco, Texas. In her appointment, she added, you are to submit a report to the Congress, and he did, this huge volume. So my question basically is, Barr has the discretion to, in effect, amend the order by, releasing what he thinks is proper.
I think he enjoys broad discretion, but Paul, I think I would take issue with the fact that the regulations can be sort of superseded by discretionary call at the outset. It's a very interesting question of governmental power and separation of powers. As a textualist, I would take the view, if were I advising the Attorney General, that you need to abide by the letter as well as the spirit of these regulations. I think his letters of March 22 and March 24 was in fact quite consistent with the text. Now, can he go beyond that as a matter of authority? Yes, he can. But he has said as a matter of authority, a matter of it's discretion informed by the rule of law, that he does intend to, and apparently this is the process that's underway, essentially redact grand jury information. One may respond, well, go to the court, just as, Ken, you did with respect to the report that you submitted to the House Judiciary Committee. And I think all this is likely to unfold. But just 3 cheers, I must say, for grand jury secrecy. It's so important that those grand jurors know that when they ask a question, and they do, the idea that, and I heard it recently on a network that I enjoy, the prosecutor can invite a ham sandwich. I wonder whether that person has been in a grand jury as a prosecutor. Oh, can you lead the grand jury and serve? Yes. But let's just be textualist. Here's a ham sandwich. We ask you to return an indictment against this ham sandwich. And this is now in the public domain. In my book, I describe, because I'm at liberty to describe it now, the reaction of the Little Rock grand jury and the Washington, D.C. grand jury to certain witnesses. You would know their names. Some have held very high office. Those grand jurors needed the assurance that this, unless a judge says this needs to go, is confidential, and the witnesses need to know that. And those then whose names are besmirched, I think that's one of the things we forget, that a grand juror, a witness in the grand jury may say Mary Rowe and John Doe committed murder. But that might be wrong, profoundly wrong. Well, what happens when that profoundly wrong testimony gets out to the reputations of John Doe and Mary Rowe? It's very, very ugly. So there are powerful, historically rooted policy reasons for grand jury secrecy, and that's what Bill Barr, as I understand it, is seeking to protect collaboratively with either Bob Mueller or the appropriate people on his staff.
So I think we only have time for one more, so, yes, sir.
I think, again, a microphone is coming around.
Do you have any comments or analysis on this matter of the Congress telling Treasury they have to release the president's income tax returns?
Yeah, the statute, the question has to do with the House powers. As I understand it, I've not made a study of it, so this is an interested citizen as opposed to an informed lawyer. The statute speaks very broadly in terms of Congress's power. Now, that having been said, can you go behind the text of the statute and say, well, why are you doing this? Especially if, as I understand it from the president's comments, he's under audit right now. So isn't the orderly process to allow the audit to conclude and then to engage in oversight and the like? When Congress does exercise its full powers under the statute, which is, I've read the statute, it's quite broadly worded, I do think that bill of attainder type issues are raised by targeting a particular individual. You say, well, wait a second, we're talking about the President of the United States, who holds this unique position and so forth. And I said, I understand that, but I do, as someone who loves our Constitution and the values that undergird the Constitution, take seriously the determination informed by British history of the founding generation in Philadelphia. In this country, there will be no bill of attainder. We say, well, you're talking about Parliament, you're talking about Congress. I recognize that. But I think the spirit, because the Constitution has a spirit, you understand that there's a spirit of the Constitution, the values of liberty, to secure, as the Declaration of Independence says, and then the preamble to the Constitution. What is this all about? It is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And one of our great liberties is you can't single a person out without judicial process.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Starr. Judge Starr will be out in the lobby signing copies of contempt. I encourage you all to get it. He has a lot of grandkids that he wants to buy Christmas presents for, so please, we'll see you out in the lobby. Thank you.
And for those who come back, sorry, let me just. That's right. And we come back here at 12:30 for lunch, but we've got to clear out now so they can set us up. Thank you.
You can stick it out in the picture here.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is three beautiful.
That's right. Handsome lawyer. Great.
Thank you.
Don, what a privilege.
It's really nice to see you.
I should have worked, but I've been racing. I had no idea that you were. Well, I'm so glad you didn't seek a writ of habeas corpus.
It's really unfortunate. Very front row because it keeps looking.
Coming up this afternoon on